This is episode 17 of the 99 Forever podcast. I'm Eric Friesen, and joining me on the show tonight is one of my favorite guests. He's making his third appearance on the podcast. He's a freelance broadcaster who's worked with Canada West and TSN 1260, Brian Swane. Brian, how's your summer going?
It's a very unique summer. I'll tell you that much, Eric. How about yours?
Yeah, it's different for sure, but the weather's starting to warm up, so that's at least a good sign. And to Oilers training camp starts tomorrow as well, so that's another step in the right direction. But yeah, overall, it has been a different summer for sure.
Yeah, well, it's something times like these to make you appreciate when things are quote unquote normal, I guess. So I take it as it goes, pretty much.
Oh, definitely. And I think once the sports world does get back up and running, everything will start to feel a little more normal. Obviously, with the social distancing guidelines and everything that we're doing in our day-to-day lives, that's gonna affect summer plans for the next couple months anyway. But other than that, I think we're starting to a little bit get back to how we were before the pandemic.
Yeah, I can definitely tell you here in Edmonton, things are getting back closer to what I would call normal, and I think that's a relative term now because there's going to be the new normal moving forward. But definitely you can feel that here in Edmonton, and I know from what I've heard, that's kind of how it is for you folks there in Saskatchewan as well.
Yeah,
Definitely, I mean, you look around the world, and there's other things are going in opposite directions in other places. So I'm very thankful that where we live here on the prairies that we're, I would say, in pretty good shape compared to what a lot of other people are going through.
definitely. Um, but are you looking forward to sports getting back? The NBA and NHL kicking off here?
You know what? I There's so much else going on in the world right now that I haven't. I won't say I haven't missed it because I have, but at the same time, it's kind of I've become accustomed to it to them not taking place right
Mm-hmm.
now, and with them coming back, there's just so many things that I have a lot of questions about how they're going to be able to pull a lot of this off, and it just seems like it's a house of cards where if one thing goes wrong, you pull the one card out and the whole thing collapses. So I. I wish them all the great success in the world. I hope it works. Of course, I'll be watching.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I'll be curious to see if these seasons are completed successfully and championships are awarded, how history will remember them. Um, it's going to be so weird watching these games without fans in the stands. There, I'll tell you, as a fan, for the teams I root for, I would almost feel if our team wins without us being
Mm-hmm.
there to be a part of it and experience it, I almost kind of might have a twinge of regret in that way. As happy as you are for your team, you almost kind of look there and wish that it could be so much more than what it will be.
Well, there's so many things that make this year different, right? There's no travel, and obviously that impacts any playoff series because it's the first time in NHL history where teams won't be going across the country to play games. And I guess you could look at different playoff format. I mean, playing an extra round of the playoffs, at least from the NHL's perspective, will make it harder to win the Stanley Cup than ever before because you now have to win 19 games instead of 16 games. But no, it's interesting you say that, and I think it's possible to be happy that sports are coming back, but maybe still have questions about how they're going to pull this off. Like it really does leave a lot of answers that we still have to figure out. And either league could shut down at any time. I don't think they've really set a precedent that if a specific number of people get sick, then that's when it's over. So I'm interested to see what will happen here. But to be honest, I've been optimistic from the start that the NHL would be able to get back on track and finish their season. So I'm honestly thrilled that training camp starts tomorrow and uh, the that they'll be able to get going. Because you live in Edmonton, you might have a slightly different perspective. I'm sort of looking at it from outside of the province, but yeah, it's definitely an exciting time for Oilers fans.
Well, two quick things I'd like to get your thoughts on, Eric. And one, speaking as a fan of the Oilers, and I remember when this first happened and the season was put on pause, and there was some question if it would come back. A lot of Oilers fans expressed really great disappointment, like almost kind of feeling robbed in the sense that this is a really good team. They've shown that when they're clicking, I mean, they were up and down this season. It still feels so weird to see it this season. We're sitting here in July, but they've had their ups and downs. When they've been clicking, they've been as good as anybody. And so
Hmm.
there's that feeling that this is a team that could pull it off. And you could certainly understand that fans would be upset that they wouldn't get to see this team in the playoffs. But then to me, and I'm curious because I know how big of a fan you are. Your
Hmm.
perspective of not being able to, if this team does get on a run and wins the Stanley Cup, goes to the Stanley Cup, whatever, how would it feel to be able to watching this all unfold without being able to engage and partake in all that comes with it? Because to me, that's as much as what makes it such a tremendous experience as a fan
Yeah.
is getting to interact with other people, be there in the arena, be there in the restaurants, whatever, watching the games, and those opportunities just honestly aren't going to exist this time.
Well, I was planning to come out to Edmonton for a playoff game this spring anyway, and I, I wouldn't have come out for a Stanley Cup final game. I just at this point can't afford the $1,000 or whatever it would be for a ticket to that game. But I would have come to a first round game and tried to get that experience. It was something I wanted to do in 2017. It's the first time as an adult that the Oilers had made the playoffs for me. So that was something I was planning to do, but I was in Toronto for grad school at the time, so I couldn't pull that off. And this year was finally going to be the year I was going to get to do that. But when it didn't, when the league got shut down, I should say, that was really disappointing. And yes, it will probably take away a little bit of the thrill of having the home fans cheer you on. And uh, I'm thinking from the players' perspective here, the fans to cheer them on and celebrate with them when they or if they win the Stanley Cup. But for the thing that stands out to me for the Oilers, I had a friend ask me if this is the only cup that McDavid ever gets, how I'd feel about it. And my answer is I'd be happy that he won a Stanley Cup. And there's no doubt about that. But I guess the disappointment would be is that they wouldn't have had the fans there for it. I'm still confident with the core they have that they're going to have a lot of deep playoff runs over the next decade, and I really think that they'll at least contend for Stanley Cups in the years to come. So they will get to experience that. It might not be this year, but I believe that the Oilers will eventually get to go on a deep run with fans in the crowd.
And I absolutely feel the same way too. And I think that's why when I looked at it, I was not going to be, I wouldn't have been heartbroken if they just decided, you know what, we're going to be like Major League Baseball in 1994. We're just not going to finish the season, because I do think that there are many, many, many great years to come ahead. And
Well,
to me, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but to me, it's not going to be the same
oh,
for whoever wins it. Without, I mean, I can't even, honestly, like I try to picture what that scene is going to be like in a completely empty, cavernous arena with the guys skating around with the Stanley Cup. I honestly can't process that thought. It's so bizarre.
it's not exactly the same, but I think back to some World Junior tournaments in the past where it's been played in European countries, and there's a solid Canadian contingent there, but overall there isn't a ton of crowd excitement for some of those games. Like, do you remember there was that epic shootout between Canada and USA in I think it was 2006, where it was the semifinal game and Jonathan Taves scored three times in the shootout to send Canada to the gold medal game. And if I remember, I I, I want to say that tournament was in Sweden or something like that, or Czech Republic maybe,
I
but
think it was the Czech, but yeah, I
was it?
remember the one you're talking about.
But you know what I mean? Like they're as exciting of a moment as that was, and one of the top World Junior moments in Canadian history. That that tournament or that specific moment didn't have a crowd going wild every time Taves put one past. Now I'm trying to remember who the U.S. goalie was. I think it was a pretty notable guy too. I can't believe it's slipping my mind, but you know what I mean. Like, I think it's going to be like one of those World Junior tournaments, and I know they said they're going to try and pump crowd noise into it. I'm still waiting to see how that's going to be. But look, at the end of the day, I'm just glad hockey's going to be back, and it's good to get your take on it too, because maybe not every single fan is as comfortable with sports leagues coming back with bigger issues at hand around the world. But no, it's interesting to get your perspective because you actually live in the city of Edmonton. So uh, I've never been a resident of Edmonton. I've lived in Alberta before for school, but that was in Calgary. So it is good to get your opinion on it.
Yeah, I can tell you there's a general excitement around here. I think a lot of people, the fact that it's coming here, I think a lot of people are taking pride in that to a degree, as they should. I mean, there's a reason that they're coming to Edmonton. It's because the response to the pandemic has been handled so well. It's because of the facilities that we have here downtown with the new-ish arena. And I mean, having been here when all the back and forth was going on to get that thing built between the Cates Group and City Hall, and to see
Mm-hmm.
this now finally, because I mean, there's parts of the arena district that are still not completed. So this is really kind of the first thing where the vision of everybody who created the arena district is being realized. And this is the kind of events that it could stage. And of course, I mean, it is, as of this moment, slated to be the site for the World Juniors coming up in
Mm-hmm.
6 months. And who knows what that's going to look like. I mean, there's been
Well,
very little said about that, I think.
uh, and
That's a reason. That arena district is I think it's really cool, and that's a reason that we're getting something like this. So people, everything else aside, Edmontonians are pretty proud, I think, to be able to be hosting this, and they should be.
definitely. And look, I think it's the best arena in the NHL. So you have a world class facility for this event. And if there was ever going to be anywhere to host a 24 team tournament, aside from safety precautions because of the limited number of COVID cases in Alberta, just having an arena like Rogers Place to host this tournament. These players couldn't ask for anything better. I've heard that some of the WHL dressing rooms in that arena are better than some of the NHL dressing rooms around the league. So that's something that players really should enjoy. But I want to kind of change gears a little bit here. The last time you were on the podcast in April, it was the Mark Messier episode for number 11, and now I've got you back for the JARI KURRI episode. So before we jump into some other topics, do you have a favorite JARI KURRI moment or memory, or what stands out to you from legendary number 17?
The funny thing is, and I think this says everything you need to know about Yuri Curry. You asked me this question, and I had to think about it for a bit. Or when you were telling me what we were going to do talk about on the broadcast here, or on the podcast, pardon me, and you'd asked me about slots of Yuri Curry, and I started thinking and thinking, and nothing really particularly jumped out to me. And then I remember, because I was working for the Edmonton Sun at the time of the 30th anniversary of the first Stanley Cup, and I was fortunate enough to get one of the assignments when they first had media availability with the players when they got into town. I still don't know how I got that gig, but
That's
but
awesome.
I did. And I'm thinking, and I talked to a few of them, and I'm thinking, did I talk to Yuri Curry? I was like, I think I did, but I can't remember if I did. And I went back, and the Sun photographer, um, uh, I forget his name, who was with her at the time. But anyway, he was kind enough to just take some random shots of me interviewing these guys, and he shared them with me. So I kept them, and I went back, and yeah, sure enough, there was me interviewing Yuri Curry, and I thought, that's crazy that I would interview a guy of this legendary status, and I couldn't even quite remember. But that's just because, I mean, he's so down to earth and so normal, and he was so reliable on the ice, and he never hogged the spotlight. And to me, that's why nothing particularly jumped out, because there was that consistency, there was that humility about him, and you couldn't have asked for he. There's no incident. I mean, everyone's kind of got their the guys who were on the boys on the bus. They all rocked the boat a little bit here and there, right? You never heard anything about Jari Kurri ever. I mean, he was just the consummate professional. And so the fact that I don't have any specific memories of him is probably the greatest compliment I can give him, if that makes sense.
Oh no, that makes total sense. And look, when the Oilers drafted him in the fourth round in 1980, I don't think that they knew that they were getting a Hall of Fame type player out of Finland, but he ended up becoming the perfect complement for Wayne Gretzky for half of his career. And when you think back to Jari Kurri, outside of Mark Messier and Wayne Gretzky, he was probably the most important piece to that dynasty. I mean, just look at everything he accomplished. There's several things that stand out to me from Curry's career, but I just want to say, first of all, that was awesome that you got to talk to those guys and you have some pictures of you interviewing them. I'm so thankful that my camera guy, when I was working for New Cap TV, took a couple shots of me interviewing Ryan Smith while the camera was rolling, and I didn't even ask him to do that, but I'm grateful to have those pictures now, because I mean that's my childhood hero. And I think you've met Steve Nash before too, right?
I have, yeah.
So,
I didn't interview him, but then again, I wouldn't have been able to interview him anyway because I would have
right.
been just stammering and stuttering.
No, that's sort of how I was too, but at first anyway. But just getting to meet someone that you idolized, it's a big deal. And I just wanted to mention some of the things that stand out to me from Curry's career. So he led the league in playoff goals during each of the Oilers' first four Cup wins.
That's
In
amazing. I didn't even know that. Or I think I knew that, but I'd forgotten. That's amazing. That's amazing when you
it
think of
is.
who he was playing with.
And
Wow.
I think Craig Simpson led the Oilers in playoff goals in
Correct.
1990, if I'm not
That's correct.
mistaken.
Yeah.
But Curry led the team in playoff goals in 84, 85, 87, 88. Now, obviously, Gretzky was in his peak at this time, and uh, having the best playmaker of all time set you up is certainly an advantage, but that doesn't take anything away from the sniper that Curry really was. And aside from that, he's also the Oilers' all-time leader in playoff goals with 92. And between 1980 and 1990, he had the third most points in the entire NHL behind only Wayne Gretzky and Peter Stastny with 1,043 points. So right there, it shows he was one of the most productive players during the entire decade of the 1980s. And finally, I think this is the one that stands out to me the most. He holds the NHL record for most hat tricks in a playoff series with 3, which he set in the 1985 Campbell Conference Final against the Chicago Blackhawks. And with the Oilers playing the Blackhawks in the playoffs again this year, that ties in nicely. But Brian, I don't think we're ever going to see that record fall.
Which one? There's a few there that I was just thinking off the top of my head. Honestly, like I
three
don't think that
three hat
92
tricks in a
goals,
series.
that one. Here's now the Oilers. How many games was that series?
6, I believe.
6. Okay. Okay. I was thinking like because I thought they might have beaten them in 5, and I'm like, you know what? If they'd gone
He
6 or
had,
7, they probably would have put up 4.
I'm pretty sure he had 12 goals in the series, but he had 3 hat tricks. So you could
That
say that
that
either
probably
of those
would go.
records, because
Yeah.
the NHL record for goals in one playoff year is 19, which I believe Jari Kurri is also tied for that. I think it's Jari Kurri, Joe Sakic, and there's another name I'm missing who also had 19 in the playoffs, and I can't believe that's escaping me right now too. But I think that if no one's ever scored 20 goals in the playoffs before, and the fact that he was able to get 12 in one series, that's going to be a really tough record to beat, especially if Wayne Gretzky couldn't even get it.
I agree, and I think the one that'll be harder because boy, that's hard. Yeah, that 3 hat tricks in the series is going to be tough to beat. Now, if somebody just happens to get hot and play absolutely out of their mind in for a week and a half, that could happen. The one that I think that 92 goals to lead the franchise record,
Yeah.
that one is tough to see anybody equaling because that's not just getting hot for a weekend or two. That's a sustained career, and as good as Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl are, they are going to have to play an awful lot of games just to be able to have the opportunity to get it. Not to say that they couldn't score that many goals if they played the same number of games as Curry in his playoff career,
Right.
but will they have that opportunity? So I'm going to say that 92 might even be harder to. Sorry, it is 92, right?
It is 92. And here's
Yeah.
another thing about that. While Curry, he isn't the all-time playoff goal leader, Wayne Gretzky obviously is that. His 92 goals with the Oilers are the most playoff goals by any player with one team.
Wow, that's not
So,
being touched. I
so
don't think that
no,
that's the one. That's the one right there. I'm going to say that one's
yeah.
not being touched.
Like if you think about it, no other team around the NHL has a player who scored 92 goals with their franchise. So that
Who's
really
just out of curiosity, who is the active leader on that list right now? Do you know? Would that be Ovechkin, maybe Crosby?
I think Ovechkin has 65 playoff goals. So I think he would be number 2 the last time I looked, and I could have that number wrong, but I thought it was 65. And the other thing is Wayne Gretzky holds the NHL record for playoff hat tricks with 10. So for someone to get 3 in one series, you're a third of the way there to passing Gretzky's record in one series. So that shows how tough it'll be to get a fourth hat trick. Even to tie the record would be a huge accomplishment, but to get a fourth hat trick in one series, I don't think we're ever going to see that in our lifetime, especially how tough defensively teams play in the playoffs now.
That's true, and I mean, I think if that were to happen, it would be a series. It would have to go 7 games, for one thing.
Absolutely.
And you look at it. You look at it where maybe what I think it's less than a quarter of all playoff series go to the distance. So that right there, I mean, you're already decreasing the number of chances that it happens with the less games you play. So you're right, but boy, that 92, I'm uh, I'm still going to say that's the toughest one, just because that's a career body work. Although Ovi at 65, he goes on 3 or 4 more, let's say 4 deep playoff runs into the conference finals. He's getting close.
Yeah, because Wayne Gretzky, if I'm not mistaken, has 122 playoff goals. So he's only halfway to Gretzky at this point. And I think that he would be a lot closer had the Capitals gone on longer playoff runs earlier in his career. We all
Right.
remember that up until he won the Cup in 2018, he'd never even been to a conference final before. So after years and years of great regular seasons, they couldn't get out of the second round, and then they finally go all the way and win the Cup. But yeah, that's quite an impressive record. So I just wanted to spend a few minutes just talking about JARI Kurri and everything he meant to the organization. And clearly one of the greatest to ever put on an Oilers uniform. Do you remember his jersey retirement, just to wrap up, in 2001?
Would you would you believe I was there?
Were you?
I was there.
That's
It was
awesome.
my buddy at the time. His parents had tickets. His parents ran a business, and they had
Okay.
seats for the business. And of course, I'd ask him kind of half jokingly, because I think it was the first game. I know they were playing the Coyotes. I want to say it was the
They,
first
they
home game of that
always did,
season.
because they always retired jerseys against the Coyotes so that Wayne Gretzky could be there.
Right. And I think it was the home opener, but I could be wrong about that. But I know it was in early October. So anyway, they'd announced the date, and I'd spent the whole summer kind of teasing my friend, saying, "Hey, you gonna be able to get those tickets? You gonna be able to get those tickets?" And he has like 3 or 4. He had 3 siblings, so everyone's asking for it, and I never for a second thought he was going to get it. It was an 8 o'clock start. It was the late game on Hockey Night Canada, and at about 6, I want to say about 6:30 that night, he phones me and he says, "I got the tickets." I'm thinking he's pranking
Wow.
me. And so, but he says, "But we got to go drive. You got to drive me over to my mom's place to pick them up." So we drove over, and we maybe got the tickets at like 7:15, and this is in the west end of the city, to get over to Northlands, which is at least a half-hour drive, for an 8 o'clock start. Anyway, long story short, we made it to our seats just in time for the ceremony. It was a fantastic ceremony. The Oilers always did it upright. He was out there on the ice, of course. The Oilers, I think, were the first ones to do that. I think that might have been the first ceremony where they did that, because I don't even know. I don't know of any other teams that did that before they started doing it. Having the
Wearing,
guys come out and skate around in their old
you
jerseys, and
know
it was
what?
always so funny too.
I'm not sure if other organizations have. I know when Wayne Gretzky retired, he was just in a suit. He came out on the back of a Ford truck.
Yeah.
I can't remember what they did for Al Hamilton, but yes, Curry, I did definitely, as far as I know, start that tradition of skating out in full uniform, which they obviously did with Grant Fuhr, Paul Coffey, Mark Messier, Glenn Anderson. So it is kind of a cool thing to see him in full uniform, because I was only 12 years old at the time. So to kind of see an 80s legend come out wearing his old gear, that was really cool. And it's hard to believe that ceremony was 19 years ago now.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just thinking about that now. Um, yeah, it's unbelievable. Yeah, because we were just getting out of high school then, and I'm thinking about these memories, and it's amazing. But yeah, I think that was because do you remember he took the pass from Gretzky?
Yep.
Yeah.
Which was very cool, and then shot it into the empty net. And they kind of duplicated it when Charlie Huddy did the same thing for Paul Coffey in 2005. So it was just kind of a nice little way for fans to get to see one last goal, at least from the great number 17 Jari Kurri. But speaking of Oilers legends, let's kick things off tonight by talking about another legend in orange and blue, and that's Kevin Lowe, who was elected to the Hockey Hall of Fame, and he might be joining the list of players we just listed, getting his jersey retired very soon. But what are your thoughts on Lowe finally getting the call?
I'm happy for him. I think he deserves it. I was honestly shocked because I think and I qualify this statement by saying I do think he deserves a spot in the Hall of Fame, but there were other guys on the list this year that I personally would have voted for before I voted for Kevin Lowe. But in previous years, I would have voted for Kevin Lowe ahead of some of the guys that did get votes. So I mean, you know
Yeah,
what? I guess it all comes out in the end. He deserves it. But I was shocked this year because some of the guys that didn't get in, I thought for sure would have their names called before Kevin Lowe. And it was interesting because after he got his name called, I was going back and reading some of this year. I mean, this year there was again that was lock, and then after that, it kind of seemed like a bit of a wide open field that no one really knew who was going to get the call. And I was reading some of the articles about guys predicting who was going to get in, and Kevin Lowe and Doug Wilson, who got in as well, were like at most were showing up as long shots as candidates to get in. Like the list of like the top 5 or 6 guys people were expecting to get in. Guys like McGillney and Theo Fleury and Daniel Alfredson, and they didn't get in, and I thought for sure it would be from that group
that someone would
that
get
they
in.
would be
Yeah,
going in. So I
that
was shocked. To be
sorry.
honest, I was really taken aback.
No, that's how I was feeling too. I didn't expect Lowe to get in, and there was some talk on Twitter. Do you think that he'll get in? This is his 20th year of eligibility. Is it finally going to be his turn? And uh, it didn't seem like it was going to happen for him. But now that he's in, and he's the seventh member from that 80s cluster of players, I think that he'll probably be the last one from that era. I don't think Andy Moog's going to get in. Excuse me. So there, to say that there were 7 Hall of Famers on that team, plus a Hall of Fame coach in Glenn Sather, it just really speaks to how great that 80s dynasty is. And also, I should mention Ken Holland getting in as well. So obviously, most of what got him there was with the Red Wings. He's only played one, or he's only managed the Oilers for one season, but hopefully that Hall of Fame career isn't completely written yet.
Yeah, and that certainly was not overlooked here, nor was the fact that we people here in Edmonton were laying claim to everything. We were claiming Jarell McGinley because, of course, he was raised in St. Albert. So it was we were trying to. I think we were saying we've got 3 Hall of Famers going in this year. We've got the guy who used to play for us, the guy who's with us now, and the guy who never played here but is from here. So there you go, the trifecta.
Definitely. And look, I mean, Lowe obviously lost some fans in oil country over the last decade or 15 years from trading away Ryan Smith in 2007 and overseeing the Oilers hockey operations department during the decade of darkness. But it doesn't take away from what he accomplished as a player. I mean, Kevin Lowe was the first draft pick that the Oilers ever had. He scored the first goal in Oilers history. He's the franchise leader in regular season and playoff games played. He played in several All-Star games. He was a member of Team Canada in the 1984 Canada Cup. And most importantly, he won 5 Stanley Cups with the Oilers and a sixth with the Rangers, where he was, I would say, the top shutdown defenseman on all those teams. So if you think about it, in my opinion, he meets the criteria of a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, he did, and like I said, I mean, he probably should have gone in years ago. I was surprised. There were years. You know what? I shouldn't say that I was surprised he never got in because there just didn't seem to be that groundswell of support for him that there should have been, maybe, or that level of appreciation for him. But suddenly, for whatever reason, that appreciation suddenly came out of nowhere this year, and then here it is. So, and having said that, great for him, and I hope the guys that I think are deserving Hall of Famers, the Fleurys, the McGillneys, the Alfredsons, I hope they have their day just as Lowe is now having his.
Definitely. And when the Oilers do retire Lowe's number 4 jersey next season, which it was unofficially retired, I should say, for about about 13, 14 years until Taylor Hall arrived in 2010. No one wore number 4, and now Chris Russell's worn it too. But after Russell's done wearing it, he really should be the last player in Oilers history to wear number 4. That jersey belongs up with all the other legendary numbers that the Oilers have retired in their history. So I'm happy for Lowe, and I hope that when he does get his day and he gets to skate out onto the ice in full uniform one last time, that the fans will applaud him for everything he accomplished as a player, because he really did do a lot for this team. And I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but he's given 37 out of the last 41 years of his life to the Edmonton Oilers organization. So that's a long time to be this committed to one team.
And I'll piggyback on that, Eric. It's not just the organization; it's what he's given to the city of Edmonton. He's been a tremendous ambassador of the community here. He's done countless charitable work. His family, him and his wife, Karen Percy Lowe, have just done amazing things in this community. And I think time heals all wounds. And I know people were because of the difficulties that this franchise went through while he was in the front office, people really soured on him and in this town, in the fan base. And I never, and I thought, I just always felt pretty bad about that because I thought that took away from the appreciation he deserves for, as you mentioned, everything that he has done. But I think people are past that point now. They moved on. I think the fact that it's a new era of Oilers hockey and that this era is finding some degrees of success now has allowed people to do that. And I think it's finally time, because let's be honest, if they'd retired the number 5 or 6 years ago,
It would have been
I would
tougher.
have been, I think we talked about this one of the previous times I was on. I would have been afraid to see what the fan reaction would have been. I think it would have been good, but I would have been nervous the whole time, thinking, "Oh, I hope this doesn't get, you know where I'm going
Yeah,
with this."
exactly. And at the end of the day, I think people still have to remember that he was the GM that built the Oilers 2006 Cup run team. He brought in Pronger, he brought in Pekka, he made all those little moves throughout the season to bring in guys like Spacek, to bring in Dwayne Rollison. He Samsonov, obviously. So there are moves that he made to get this team to the Stanley Cup final, and I think that he deserves credit for that too. And even though maybe his managerial career wasn't spectacular, he still did get the Oilers to a Stanley Cup final and was that close to winning a 7th ring. So he, in my opinion, he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. And the next thing I think we're going to talk about now is something that we had planned ahead of time, and that's the idea of the Oilers possibly starting a Ring of Honor or a Ring of Excellence in Edmonton for some of the notable players in Oilers history who probably won't get their number retired by the team, but should be honored for their contributions to the organization. So, Brian, we've put together our lists of the first 5 players we think should be named. So there's obviously going to be more than 5, but these are just the first 5 that came to mind for us. And I'm sure that you'll have someone on your list that I will kick myself and say, oh, why didn't I have that guy? But if the Oilers did put up together a Ring of Honor, these will be some of the names that we think would show up on that list. Now, Brian and I have also agreed not to have Ryan Smith on this list because I believe that Ryan Smith will be in the Hockey Hall of Fame one day. You look at, or I shouldn't say I believe he will. I believe he should be in the Hockey Hall of Fame one day. I don't think he'll get in, but I believe that he'll have his number retired, is what I should say. And the reason I've said that Ryan Smith should be in the Hockey Hall of Fame is based on his international career alone. And maybe before we even get into the Ring of Excellence, I should ask you about that, Brian. Do you think that Ryan Smith deserves um, any any type of support for getting into the Hall?
There's a great case to be made for him. There's a great case to be made for him. I don't call him a slam dunk Hall of Famer. Um, I wish I could look at this from the perspective of somebody outside of Edmonton. You hear
He's
within
folk
Edmonton and
hero in
within
Edmonton, right? So that's why we hold him so close, because he's
yeah.
a legend here.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm sure there's guys that have done pretty close or, equal to what he has that people in other NHL cities hold as dearly as he's held here, and wondering why there's guys not in the Hall of Fame. So I'm hesitant to comment on that. Like I say, I think there's a case to be made for him. That I will say that. And then the other thing that I will say I cannot offer as definitive a statement about him going into the Hall of Fame. I will say without question they're retiring the jersey number, and
Definitely.
I don't care whether the fact that all the other guys who've had their numbers retired are in the Hall of Fame. I don't think that has to be a qualifying criteria. I think that's just the way it happened to work out.
I
It's just
couldn't
that
agree
all those
more.
guys were so good that they happened to mean as much to the organization as they meant to hockey as a whole. I would have. I said forever that whether Lowe got in the Hall of Fame or not, his numbers should have been going up there, and I would say the same thing for Ryan Smith too. So that's something that within the Oilers bubble, without having that maybe context, being able to step back and look at what he meant to the greater game, he deserves to have his number up there in the rafters alongside those other. I guess what is it? 8 other numbers now? 9 other
Yeah,
numbers?
yeah, because we also have to include Glenn Sather, we have to include Rod Phillips, so there's more banners up there. But uh, like I said, realistically, his NHL statistics probably don't meet the standard of a Hall of Fame forward. He was never an elite player in the NHL, but he still did score close to 400 goals and play 19 years in the league. So he was an excellent player for a long time. The thing with Smith is that I'm saying he should almost get in based on his international resume. And look, he is already in the Alberta Sports Hall of Fame. He's in the double IHF Hall of Fame. So he has been honored by some of these organizations, and that's great. But there are players in the Hockey Hall of Fame who didn't play in the NHL. So I would say that based on everything he accomplished in the NHL plus his international resume is why he should get in. I mean, uh, look, he's the only player ever to win gold at the World Juniors, the World Championships, the World Cup of Hockey, the Winter Olympics, and the Spangler Cup. So this is a guy. I mean, he really did live up to that title of or that nickname of Captain Canada.
Yeah, well, there's a reason they call him that, and it's his international resume that really does make the compelling case. It's untouchable. It's almost unrivaled in a number of ways, and it's if you were inducting, I would probably say no, he's not a Hall of Famer going. He's not a Hall of Famer going in on his NHL alone. But when you look at what he's done internationally, and it's just unparalleled. It's that's where like I say, you have a very compelling case for him to get in, and it's going to be fascinating to watch because, like I say, I know everyone here thinks he's good, should be a Hall of Famer, and I'm curious. I would love to know what the perspective is in the greater hockey world because ultimately, it's going to be that greater hockey world that decides his fate as to whether he is in the Hall of Fame.
Absolutely, and I think you and I are both in agreement that he probably will fall just short of that, but uh, we are on the same page that he should absolutely have his number retired, and I look forward to seeing him back on the ice. He actually had one of the best retirements ever, where he actually did get to go out almost in a Gretzky-esque way, the way Wayne was able to retire in Madison Square Garden in 1999 and wave goodbye to the fans. Smith had a similar farewell in 2014 at Rexall Place. But so that's why Ryan Smith isn't going to be on either one of our lists, because this ring of excellence that we're going to be talking about is focusing on some players who won't get their numbers retired likely, but they should still be honored by the organization. So, Brian, why don't you kick things off tonight with your fifth most deserving member?
I would be happy to. First, I'm going to offer a quick qualifier, if I may.
Okay.
So, because you and I have been working on this for a while, and it's been funny how much trouble I've been having nailing it down.
We always do this where we have to switch our list. We talked about this too when we did our Oilers all-time rosters back in the spring, how many times we shuffled guys around.
Yeah, so the reason I finally have about 2 days ago, I landed on my final 5. I had 3 slam dunks, and then there were like 12 guys, maybe not that many, but there were many guys that I was considering for the last 2 spots. And the reason I knew I finally got it right is because it wasn't my favorites that I picked. So I'm like, you know what? Okay, now if I would have been suspicious of myself if it was my favorites that were getting in there, but now I know, you know what? If you were able to pick the guys that weren't your favorites, that probably means you got it right. So I've left it at that, and
Okay.
I've also decided to go with the philosophy that guys, I'm giving the honor to the older guys first. The tiebreaker went to the older guys because
Yeah.
you know what, the younger guys, they'll be around longer. They'll have future years to get in. For the first 5, I thought I should pick from the older guys. So with that in mind, number 5 on my list is Craig McTavish.
Interesting.
He was he was a captain, a tremendous leader for this team on the ice. Again, I think people of a certain age might only remember him for his work behind the bench and his front office work, and like Kevin Lowe, that may distort what the perception of what he means to this franchise is. He was here for a long time. He ranks very high on a lot of lists. Won multiple cups with his team. Like I say, was a captain. Stayed with the team to the very end and of the dynasty years, and then was kind of he was the leader of this team as they transitioned out into those mid '90s periods, and then of course he was traded to the Rangers, where he went and won another Stanley Cup. But Craig McTavish, and I know that's going to be a lot of head scratching. Like I say, ties went to the older guys. I thought what he meant to this team in terms of his leadership, and this guy was like, he's the last guy to not wear a helmet. I mean, he was the epitome of just lay it all out there. That's how he played. And I'm not, by no means am I condoning not wearing a helmet. Wear your helmets, kids.
Yeah.
But
But
it epitomized who he was as a player.
yeah, no, that, like I said, that's a cool fact that he is the last player in NHL history to play without a helmet, which, if you can believe, was still in like 1996. It was crazy that there was by that far into the 90s that there was still a player not wearing a helmet. Because if you watch games from the mid 80s, you'll see most of the players wearing helmets by then, but the odd guy won't. And if you go back even further, a decade into the mid 70s, it's almost like most players didn't have a helmet, and there was a spattering of players who were wearing one. So to go that far into the 90s and still have someone without a helmet is kind of crazy to think. But no, I'm interested. That's an interesting pick. I didn't have McTavish as one of my top 5, but that's a solid choice.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, it's I'll be interested to see you, because I say in my case,
Okay.
if I was close on one or the other, I went with the older guy.
No, that's a good reasoning to do it. For my number 5, I had Charlie Huddy, and Huddy played parts of 11 seasons in Edmonton. He's one of only 7 players that won all 5 Stanley Cups with the Oilers. He handled most of the defensive responsibilities on Edmonton's top pairing for years, which allowed Paul Coffey to freewheel offensively with the Oilers' incredible forwards. And Huddy still scored 20 goals one year, and I believe he even led the league in plus minus in 83, I want to say. So in my opinion, he definitely qualifies as someone who should be on the Ring of Honor.
Yes, and a spoiler alert, I'll be getting to Charlie Huddy in a little bit.
Okay.
So, but yeah, no, you said it. interesting bit of trivia, and I want to make sure I've got this right. You mentioned that like his plus minus numbers were absolutely off the charts, and I don't remember if he's. I know he had the single season record. I don't know if it's since been surpassed. You might know. He
I'm not
was
sure
there.
if Gretzky topped it.
Yeah, there was one year where it was just some absolutely astronomical figure that it's in. You know, it's. I'm just looking it up here now. Uh, Yeah, I'm not finding it.
Gretzky's
I'll have it
best
by the
plus
time I'm
minus.
ready to bring him up. But yeah, he was he I think you articulated very well why he belongs in this group of five.
For sure. And I'm just seeing here Gretzky's best plus minus year was in 85. He was plus 98. So that'll be a tough one to top. He would have had to hit triple digits. So, but yeah, if you find that stat, that's an interesting one. I'll see if I can find it too. But
It might have been for a defenseman, maybe. I'm not
single
sure, but
season
I
for a
will.
defenseman, it could have.
Yeah,
Uh,
I will have this by the time I get to Charlie Huddy.
he was plus 62 in 83. I believe that was
That's
the year.
crazy.
That was the year that he won the plus minus trophy. But so yeah, Huddy is my number 5. So we'll move on now to your number 4.
Okay, my number four is very similar to the reason that I picked number five, and that's Kelly Bookberger.
Hmm.
Again, I selected him for his leadership, his longevity with the team. A lot of people don't realize that this because he was so young when he first came up with the Oilers, but he was actually with them for their last 3 Stanley Cups. So he's up there in terms of having because he was with them in actually came up in the end of '86, and then so was with them with the '87, '88, and '90 wins. Um, for me, what really stands out about him, he never put up great offensive numbers, and he's behind even McTavish in that respect. But he's among the league lead or the all-time team leaders in games played. And to me, he was the captain when this team transitioned. Like Kevin Lowe came back, and of course in '97, '98, and provided some leadership. But Bucky was the guy who was here all those years who stepped up and was the veteran leader as this team transitioned out of its seasons when it missed the playoffs in '93 through '96 and became a playoff team and a very good playoff team, winning series in both '97 and '98. He was the leader, and he was the guy who I feel scored the second most memorable goal of the last or maybe the third most would probably be better to say, but of the last 30 years in Oilers history, when he scored the game winner, the overtime winner in Game 3 of their miracle comeback against the Dallas Stars, Game 3 '97. But yeah, no, he played. He's number. He just got passed. He was number 5 on the all-time game played list for the team until Sean Horkoff passed him by 1. So now he's number 6. But uh, 13 seasons with the team, 3 Stanley Cups, was a captain. Again, much like Craig McTavish, just laid it all out there. Heart and soul kind of guy. And like I say, tiebreaker goes to the older guys. So
Yeah.
if it was between him and Horkoff, I was going to go with Bucky.
Great pick as well. I debated having him on my top 5 as well. And I mean, this is a guy, like you said, he scored a very famous goal, but that wasn't necessarily his role, putting up the points. He was the tough as nails guy who battled hard and did all the dirty work in the corners and led by example. And I'm sure he was a leader in the room too. But these are guys who, like your first 2 guys, who are just sort of the heart and soul players on the team, not necessarily the superstars like Gretzky and Messier, but the players who you need to win Stanley Cups, who are just vital pieces of your bottom 6. And I think that those are 2 great picks by you to start things off. And like I said, I hadn't considered McTavish as much, but Buckberger was one of the guys who I definitely considered including in mine.
And I forgot to mention too, he is the team, and by a wide margin, the team's all-time penalty minutes leader.
Yeah.
So there you go.
And I sometimes wonder if guys like George Laraque would have played his whole career in Edmonton, would he have passed that or not? But that's still something that's a tip of the cap to Buckberger. When you said
That's
that
another
goal,
record that's not being touched.
right, especially in today's NHL when
Yeah.
penalty minutes, there's not guys having these 250 and 300 minute seasons
Yeah.
anymore because there's no enforcers. But just thinking back, Oh, I'm losing my train of thought now. About Buckberger, about the goal he scored. So when you said that, I was trying to think of what are some of the most famous goals in recent history, and maybe that's another idea we'll have to do for a podcast down the
Oh, I'm in.
road.
I'm in. Next time.
Okay.
There we go.
So I was going to list off a bunch right now, but we'll stay on track, and that's something that we can come back to because I always like to find these ideas for lists that we can do whenever I have you on the show. So that's a good one, and I'll move on now to my number 4 pick, and I've got Bill Ranford. Uh, Ranford played 10 seasons in Edmonton, won 2 cups with the team in 1988 and 1990, as well as the Conn Smythe Trophy as playoff MVP in 1990. And he's the Oilers' all-time leader in saves and games played by a goaltender. And I would say he's the second best goalie in Oilers history behind only Grant Fuhr. And that's no slight to Andy Moog. Andy Moog was a fantastic goaltender too. But when I think of uh, Bill Ranford and everything he did in the late 80s and early 90s to keep this team solid in the net. And when Fuhr was gone, he carried the torch and went through some lean years in the mid 90s, but came back and finished his career in Edmonton in 1999-2000 after spending a few years with a couple other organizations. And yeah, he's a guy I have to have on my Ring of Excellence.
You know, it's funny now that we're bringing up all these guys, and it's pretty cool how many of them came back to finish their career in Edmonton. Think about the guys we just talked about so far. Smith came back and
Yeah,
finished as an Oiler. Lowe came back and finished as an
Kevin
Oiler.
Lowe came back for sure.
Ranford, who yeah, I don't remember that one as clearly. Like, I don't remember his last game. I don't remember if there was like a standing ovation for him or whatever. But there's a lot of guys that have come back to do that. That's actually pretty cool. It just kind of hit me as we're talking about these guys right now.
And
How
he
many
wasn't that
guys?
old. Like
Yeah,
he was only 30 excuse me, he was only 33 when he retired.
really?
So yeah,
Wow.
so he I mean he retired in 2000. He could have kept going. I mean would the Oilers have brought him back in 2000 2001 to back up Tommy Salo? I I would possibly be okay with that. I'm trying to think of some of the guys they had at that time. There isn't necessarily one backup who really stands out. I know they were kind of using a bunch of different guys. Not too long after that, like Ty Conklin, Jussi Markkinen, um, Dominic Roussel, I
Stolikov
think.
was around that time, wasn't he?
Yeah, yeah. Roussel, I think, was there for a minute, but yeah, but Ranford is a guy who, when you look at everything he accomplished, I mean, to win a Conn Smythe Trophy, I think that has to get you in consideration almost on that alone. And when you play 10 seasons in Oilers history, I don't have the exact number of players in front of me who have played at least 10 seasons with the Oilers, but it's not a long list. I know Ryan Nugent Hopkins is set to join that company next year, which is incredible to think about. Seems like he just arrived. Um, but yeah, he's a player who definitely deserves to be in any type of Ring of Honor, Ring of Excellence, because he really was one of the best goalies the Oilers have ever had.
Yeah, and to finish up what you were mentioning there, because that's a great point. I think I'm almost 100% certain that Nugent Hopkins is going to become the 15th guy to play 10 seasons. I know that as
Okay,
far as goalies go, there's only been one other, and
Grant
that's
Fuhr.
Fuhr. So I mean, it's very, very rare, and it's tough to see. Goalies don't last with teams for. I mean, there's very few that stick with a team for 10 years.
I didn't think it was 15. Like, are you including Gretzky's year with the WHA for him getting to 10?
Uh, I might have. I don't think I was. No, no, I don't think because I saw
Okay.
the list the other day, and I'll see if I can find that
Yeah, if you
before
can send that to me,
we wrap up.
I mean, I could always look that up too. But that's cool. I've never actually searched how many players have played 10 seasons in Edmonton,
You
but
you would
I
be
always assumed.
surprised. What struck me is the car or kind of took me by surprise is how many there were a few guys in the last few years. Well, when I say the last few, I mean the last 10 or 15, but well beyond the glory years that you
Yeah,
would have thought, oh, wow, I did not remember he was here for that long. Um, but yeah, so yeah, oh, and here we go. I just found the list actually. Do you want me to read it off to you?
yeah. Let's do that before we
Okay.
move on to the next one.
So it's Smith, Lowe, Buckberger, Horkoff, Anderson, Messier, Hemsky, Morrow, Huddy, Fear, Ranford, Dave Hunter, Todd Marchant, and your JARI KURRI.
Yeah, there are a couple. I forgot that Ethan Morrow had played 10 seasons with the team
Yeah,
too.
that's the one. And Hemsky too. I'm like, Hemsky played 11? Wow.
And he was with the I mean, he would have played even more if it wasn't for the lockout. Don't forget he played he started in '02 with the team. And then after
Same for Horkoff and Moreau as well.
yeah, well, Horkoff he started even in 2000. So, he left in 2013, so that's 12 seasons right there with the lockout. You're taking one out. That's a cool list. I'm glad you were able to find that. That's interesting. And I guess you can add Nugent Hopkins to that list. And I don't want to get too far off track, but I was looking at it, and Nuge isn't that far away from passing guys like Wayne Gretzky for career games with the Oilers, which is crazy to think that Nuge has almost been an Oiler longer than Gretzky was an Oiler.
It is, and it's something that I don't think a lot of people realize and appreciate what he's meant and how much he's dedicated and committed to this team. And I told you this at the time. I know you've done at least one, maybe two articles with him for the hockey writers about talking about his importance to this team and
For
how
sure.
you'd like to see him be finish his career with him. And that's what really first brought to my attention, because you think just off the top of your head, it's like, I cannot believe for a second he's been here that long. He's played that many games, and he's redefined himself throughout his time here.
Yep.
He's always been what they've asked him to be. When they needed him to be more of a scorer, he did whatever he could to fill that role. He's become a much improved two-way player now. I think, a very good penalty killer, and they've had to apply him in those roles. And this guy is seriously underappreciated in Oilers history. His place in Oilers history is not appreciated.
Definitely. And in the middle of his career, he dealt with a couple injuries, and also they he was asked by the coaching staffs to play more of a defensive or two-way role, and I think he lost some of the creativity in his game, and that's only come back really the last 2 seasons now. And I want to see him continue to flourish and play with Draisaitl and Yamamoto and be that offensive force that he can be, because he has a ton of talent. I mean, you don't get to be a first overall pick without having some sublime talent. So I really want to see Ryan Nugent Hopkins just continue to progress and become a consistent 70-point guy. And I think he still can. He's still only 27. And this, I mean, we're talking about a ring of excellence here. This is a guy who, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, should absolutely be on one of these lists.
He's headed in that trajectory, and if it'll be interesting to see how long he stays with this team, because he's getting up there with some pretty elite company, and if he's even around just 3 or 4 more years, he's going to be in so many categories, sharing a list with the all-time with legends, literally legends.
He's already top 10 in Oilers goals, and he's pushing for top 10 in assists and points, which I think he can reach this year even. So this is a player who is going to still, he's been a big part of the team for the last decade, and he's going to be a contributing factor for years going forward. But I won't get off track too far with Nugent Hopkins, as much as we'd love to talk about him. We could do a whole podcast on the guy probably, but let's keep going with your number 3 pick.
All right, well, I'll make this one quick because we've already covered this gentleman, Charlie Huddy.
Okay.
So yeah, Charlie Huddy, I think you look at his stats, his accomplishments. He won the 5 Stanley Cups as well. He was reliable defenseman, but he put up some pretty good offensive numbers. We talked about what he did plus minus wise, and I still haven't found. I'm still looking actually for the single season record for plus minus. I'm not sure what if he does have that record. But anyway, as you said, what was it? He was plus 62
plus
that
62
one season.
For a defenseman, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. So, just another reliable heart and soul guy who was around for all of the great years. And I think the important thing too, and I think you probably noticed this in my first 3 picks for this Ring of Honor, is these are guys who you would never in a million years consider as guys you would retire their numbers. But these are guys who were so important to the fabric and the success of this team, and I think this is the platform in which you recognize them for what they meant in that respect.
For sure. And also, I just wanted to point this out. When Paul Coffey set the franchise records for goals, assists, and points by a defenseman in 1985-86, and as well as the NHL record for single season goals by a defenseman with 48. That year he was plus 61. So even in Coffey's best season, he was still one behind Huddy's plus 62 and 83. So I'm pretty sure that it has to be the record then. If Paul Coffey doesn't have it, then no one else has it.
Well, I was wrong. As far as defensemen go for single season, he is there. Wow, there's a lot of guys ahead of him on the list. You know, you would never in a million years. Actually, you would guess who the all-time leader is. Number two and number
Well, are
three.
we talking just for the Oilers, or because Bobby Orr is definitely going to be number one in
Yeah,
NHL history?
yeah. No, you're right. For the Oilers, he does have that record. But Bobby Orr was plus 124 in 1970-71. Plus
Which is
124. How
That's
does that even
incredible.
happen?
I
Yeah.
know that's unthinkable, and that's one of the stats that he even has over Wayne Gretzky. It's just incredible to think of how dominant he was on both sides of the puck. But yeah, Huddy is a solid pick, and I'll move on to my number three guy, and I've got Esa Tikkanen. And
Ah, okay.
go no, sorry, did I take one of your guys?
No, this is the one that I was. This remember when
Okay,
I said that I knew I made the right choice when my favorites weren't on there?
right.
It's because Tikkanen had been on there. If Tikkanen, you know I love
Okay,
Tikkanen.
yeah.
I might have actually graded him on a harder scale,
Okay.
because on a steeper curve, just because he had not only he had to get over my favoritism. But I'll let you. I could talk about Tikkanen for hours, but I'll let you
All right.
take
Well,
this
I'll
discussion
I'll
here.
just I'll just say a few quick things on him, and then I'll let you take it away because I know you love the guy. But I think he's best remembered by a lot of hockey fans as an agitator, but he was a quality scorer too. I mean, he had four consecutive 30-goal seasons in Edmonton. He won four Stanley Cups in 1985, 1987, 1988, and 1990, as well as a fifth with the Rangers in 94. And he famously scored the series winning overtime goal against the Flames in the 1991 playoffs, still one of my favorite goals ever. And he's this is something that I think doesn't get mentioned enough, but he was the third man on the greatest line in NHL history with Wayne Gretzky and Jari Kurri. And what a way to start your career by playing with another Finn, and at that time, the probably one of the best European players in NHL history, and I think he still has to be considered that. And the greatest player to ever play the game. I mean, what a way to come into the NHL and get to play with those guys. Must have been a dream come true for Tikkanen, and he was a contributing member of that team. I think he had a career high 78 points with the Oilers that one year, playing with those two. And when you think about, he's not a guy who gets mentioned a lot. It's always Gretzky and Curry, the dynamic duo of that era. And I know we use that term for McDavid and Draisaitl now, but I don't think Curry gets mentioned enough for everything he accomplished with the Oilers. What about you?
No, probably not. And I'm almost regretting not putting him on now. No, but I mean, the funny thing is when we did our all-time team a few months ago, we had him on the top line. I think both of us, right?
We did, yeah. We
Yeah,
actually, I think we had the same second lines too. We just basically went with the Oilers' top six forwards from the late '80s.
yeah. So I mean, that speaks to how important we thought he was, and what he meant playing alongside those. Essedekin meant playing alongside
Absolutely,
those two on the top line. He allowed them to do what they do. You're right. He was an agitator. He's the classic guy you love to have on your team, and guy
yeah.
that everyone else in the league hates. They called him the Shadow. Because that's what he would do. He would shadow the other team's best player, and he would be out there looking after Wayne Gretzky. And yeah, but the fact that's what he's remembered best for. But like you point out, put up some really good offensive numbers too. And I always kind of take that as a grain of salt because I mean, obviously when you're playing alongside, you and I could fall bass backwards into 30 points playing alongside those two
Yeah,
guys, right? But
yeah.
still, yeah, but still to put up those kind of 78 points, nothing to sneeze at. What 4 30-goal seasons, right?
Four straight 30-goal seasons in Edmonton. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
mean, even though he was easily the third best player on that line. I mean, he wasn't even on Kurri's level. But if you can have a guy who's scoring at Gretzky's rate, I mean, by the time Tikkanen arrived, Gretzky was still putting up 200-point seasons. And then you've got JARI KURRI, who's consistently scoring 50 goals and even 60, 70 goals some years. And then you bring in another 30-goal scorer on that line. Now you're talking about just almost an unstoppable unit. And even if the opposition is able to shut them down to maybe 2 goals a night, or if you want to call that shutting them down, limit them to 2 goals a night, they still have to deal with Mark Messier's line hopping over the boards next. So that's probably a big reason why that team was just such an offensive juggernaut, especially in the mid to late 80s.
Yeah, Tikkanen I'll tell you, I told you I changed my mind on this list about 14 times. He was probably on about 12 of those 14 times that I changed my mind. So it was really tough. This list was really tough. And as I said to you when we were doing this, it makes you appreciate the depth
Yeah.
that this team has had over the years, because there are so many guys that are not going to get mentioned here on this that deserve recognition. And with that in mind, I do hope the Oilers institute something along this in the future, because there's a lot of guys that we know are not going to have their banners hung up. They're not going to make the Hall of Fame, but they meant so much to this team, and they deserve to have them recognized.
And it would be cool to just walk around the concourse at Rogers Place and
Yeah.
have some sort of plaque on the wall, or some display to show the guys who have been honored. And I think we can both agree, if they do this, you could do maybe one a year or something like that. That would be kind of a cool way to do it. Like every year you pick one player from the past who deserves this honor. So of course you're going to get some of the big names out of the way first, but I don't think that if they did bring this in, there's no way that Tikkanen wouldn't be included at some point, right?
I mean, I would. He
Even if
could
he
have.
isn't in your top five, like
Yeah.
he'd have to be at the very least for, I think, most people in anyone's top 10 to deserve this.
Oh, I would think so, but and once we get through our top five, maybe we can revisit a few of the guys that we just had on our borderline. But in looking at
Sure.
this, there are so many guys that I can sit there and say, boy, this guy deserves it. This guy deserves it, and you quickly get past the point where you're at 10. Like I was
Yeah.
honestly had so. But anyway, that we can save that conversation for
Well,
when we get through here.
yeah, for sure. So let's move on now to your next pick.
This would be my number two then.
Yep.
My number two. Oh, okay. We've already covered this guy, Bill Ranford.
Bill Ranford. Do you want to just share a thought or two on him?
You really explained why he was so
Okay.
important to this team. He was what this team had that kept them going, kept them very competitive, and had a couple nice playoff runs in 91, 92, after a lot of the other guys from the glory years had moved on. We talked about where he ranked on the all-time Oilers list, the Conn Smythe MVP. And this is the one thing I'll say, and this is probably going to be a bit of a controversial statement, but I think what he meant to that Stanley Cup winning team in 1990 was the most significant role any goalie played on any Oilers Stanley Cup winning team. And what I mean by that, not to say that he was better than Grant Fuhr, not to say that he even necessarily played better than Grant Fuhr in, say, 1987, but the Oilers could have won a Stanley Cup with Grant Fuhr maybe not playing as well as he did in one of those years. I don't think the Oilers win the Stanley Cup that year without Bill Ranford playing at the level he did, and that's why he was the Conn Smythe MVP.
Couldn't have said it better. I'll move on now to my number two guy, and um, this is one player who I think has to be included. And I was almost debating if I should make him number one, and I ended up settling on number two for him. But I picked Dave Semenko, and I mean, really, what can you say about Dave Semenko? He just meant so much to the organization for decades in several different roles, from a player to a commentator to an assistant coach to an ambassador for the organization. Just he loved this franchise and this city so much. Gretzky was the franchise player and Semenko was the insurance. He's the toughest player in franchise history easily, as well as probably one of the most popular players the team's ever had. And his intimidation factor allowed the Oilers superstars to operate freely, and that's worth its weight in gold right there. Eh, You know, he played for the Oilers in the WHL, or sorry, not the WHL, the WHA and the NHL. He actually scored the final goal in WHA history in the 1979 Avco Cup final, and he won two cups with the Oilers in 84 and 85. And I'm so happy that he got to play in the 2016 Heritage Classic alumni game in his hometown of Winnipeg before he tragically passed away in 2017. So he had just started a new position, I believe, that year with the Oilers as an ambassador and kind of meet and greeting with business partners and fans and things like that. So it's such a shame that his life was cut short at age 59. I think he had so much more to give, and it's just it shows how devastating of an illness, of a disease that cancer is, and it can take down a big man like that very fast.
That's a tremendous, very well said. First off, Eric, you're talking about what he meant to this team, and that's a tremendous pick. And I'll be honest, he's not one that was in the final mix of guys that I was considering. But again, that just speaks to how many guys on this team meant so much. And I think you're selecting him is kind of very much in the same spirit of me selecting McTavish and Buckberger. You know, these are not the guys that put up the prolific numbers. They were not the star players, but what they meant to this team transcends that. And this is the kind of way that you recognize them. So I think that's a tremendous choice. And I think it's pretty cool you have him at number 2 too. It says a lot. I mean, hey, he was Gretzky's bodyguard. So hey, who's the most important guy? It's the guy next to the most important guy, right?
Yeah,
And that was
exactly.
him. He was the one looking out for him.
Well, that's what I said. If Gretzky's the foundation for the franchise, then Semenko's easily the insurance, right? You gotta pay both.
Yeah, no, exactly. So a wonderful choice because, like I said, it's somebody that I wouldn't have considered or I didn't have in my list of finals, and I think that's what makes this conversation so great is because that shows how tough the conversation this will be. And I'm betting we have the same number one.
Well, let's see, because if it is, we can both kind of both talk on them together. So I'll let you take it away.
Well, is his number 39?
It is.
Okay, then. Does his first name start with a Doug and end with a Lus?
Yeah, that name must be very important in Oilers history because if I'm not mistaken, and I just want to confirm this because I know that two of them have it. Just to say how important that first name is in Oilers history. So Wayne Gretzky, Mark Messier, and Paul Coffey all have the middle name Doug or Douglas. So that just kind of shows how how important it is. And then, of course, we got the best post-dynasty Oiler for about a decade, and that was Doug Weight.
Yeah, this guy. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. That's a great trivia. Where did you come up with that one? That's a great one, boy.
just from Wikipedia searches over the year. Like I obviously knew. I mean, going back to when I was like 10 years old and wrote a book report on Wayne Gretzky for in grade 4, I think. I knew that Wayne Gretzky's middle name was Douglas, but then just over the years, I found Paul Coffey and Mark Messier had that as well. So just kind of cool to see what that name means to the organization, if you could say so. And Doug Weight, I'll let you talk about him first.
I have to ask this question before I get on to Doug Weight now. What is Connor McDavid's middle name?
Ooh. I actually do not know off the top of my head. Yeah, I'm just confirmed it. Yeah, all three of them have Douglas as their middle name. Let's see if Wikipedia has that as I Google this on the fly.
Now will just be floored if it's. I'm pretty sure that Leon Draisaitl's middle name is not Douglas, but you never know.
No. However, Leon Draisaitl's father did play hockey with Mark Messier's father in Germany, so there is an Oilers connection there too.
That's wild. That is absolutely wild. We're going to have to spend some time. We're getting sidetracked in here, but we got for the next time we have to figure out how many Oilers in history have had the middle name Doug. or Douglas. That's but yeah, the Doug Waite. This guy, when he came here, I remember the day they acquired him. And I was crushed because he was traded for Essatikkanen.
Yeah.
And this was in the 92-93 season. Obviously, I was still a young kid at the time. Well, these things hit you hard when hit you harder when you're a young kid. That was the year that everything was going to heck in a handbasket for the Oilers. They were not going to make the playoffs for the first time ever. It was not something that I, as a fan, was accustomed to, and that was like the day when I knew it was over. Like I was still holding on hope. Like they were 20 points out of the playoffs or whatever with 20 games to go, and I still believed. And I knew when they made that trade that when it kind of like hit me, and I was just devastated. And it took me a couple of years to really start to fully appreciate Doug Waite, and I came to understand his brilliance in the 95-96 season, which was, I think, when we can start to
Yeah.
say that the Oilers came out of their tailspin and started to trend upwards. That was the year they acquired Cujo. And towards the end of that season, they really started to gel and show some things. And of course, it manifested itself with them making the playoffs the following year, and then the subsequent years after that. But I remember I looked this up once that he of course had cracked the 100-point total that season, and that was something that was on
Yeah.
a non-playoff Oilers team in an era when the offense had dipped significantly, and he was the only player to crack 100 points from, I want to say, between 1991 and when McDavid did it for
2017.
2017. So
Yeah.
26 seasons, he was the only player to do that. And you know what? If anyone,
26 seasons. Yeah.
yeah, that's just remarkable. And even more remarkable that season was, and this is the stat I wish I had off the top of my head, the percentage of goals that he was in on for the Oilers that season was among the highest rates of any player in team history. And that's just because they didn't score a ton that year, but it just showed how significant he was to that team. He was a brilliant playmaker. Is an absolute brilliant playmaker. He had one of my favorite moments in Oilers' modern playoff history is the 2000 playoff series when he and his line mate at the time, Bill Guerin, went back-to-back hat tricks against the Stars in games 3 and 4 here at home. And I just remember when he got that hat trick. There's this freeze frame I have in my mind. There's a classic photo of him just pumping his fist, how jacked he is. And to see a guy who was, I think, one of the greatest playmakers in Oilers history. I mean, he's not on Gretzky's levels, obviously, but anyone else after that, I'll put Doug Waite up against him. And
Absolutely.
yeah, to
And
see him have a goal scoring moment like that though was just awesome. And yeah, I think the world of the guy. I would love to see him. I'll put this question to you. Maybe when you're sharing your thoughts, you can touch on it.
mhm.
Is he somebody that maybe at least deserves to have it discussed a little bit about having his number up there in the rafters?
You know that I was just thinking about that before we started this podcast, that he would probably be the one player on this list who you could make a case for that should still have their number retired. And maybe he does even get into the Hockey Hall of Fame. I still think he's a little further down the list of players ahead of him who are deserving to get in first. But he did get the Stanley Cup, so that does help him, aside from some good numbers. And I just looked it up here. So he had 104 points, which I knew, in 95, 96, but I didn't realize how big of a factor it was into the Oilers team stats. Like 43% of he contributed to 43% of their offense that year,
That's unbelievable.
because they scored 240 goals that year. So to be in on 43% of their goals, I mean, especially on a team that didn't have a ton of talent. I mean, Ryan Smith wasn't even a full-time player at this point. So really an excellent player. And I just wrote an article on Doug Waite a couple months ago, and at the Hockey Writers. And the thing, I'm sure other people have heard this story before, but it's kind of funny how he got traded for Teakin. It was actually when the Oilers were on a road trip in New York City.
That's right. They switched locker rooms.
They did. So he got a call before the game from the Rangers GM at the time, who I'm trying to remember who it was in
I think it's
'93.
Sinden.
Yeah, that might be because Sather was still the Oilers GM for another 6 years before he went to the Rangers. But so he got a call and said that you've been traded to Edmonton, and then Wait and Tikkanen switched locker rooms, and Wait's girlfriend at the time, who later became his wife, was at the game, and she ha- there was no cell phones then, so she hadn't received a text or anything saying I've been traded. So she came out. She's watching the game with some of the other wives, and she realizes that Doug Wait's playing for the Oilers while watching the game. So what a way to find out your husband was traded.
Yeah, it's boy, it that had to be really surreal, and especially like you say in those days. I mean, word doesn't travel fast. I didn't find out. I mean, what I would do then is as soon as I got whenever the Oilers were playing, as soon as I got home from school, and especially that was a game in New York. So like you say, that was like a 5 o'clock start. So I remember I probably got home from school and like turned on the pregame show right away at 3:30 or 4 o'clock, and that was what they were saying is that was the breaking news. And I remember now that you bring it up that they were basically just trading locker rooms. And I wonder. I'm sure he's talked about this over the years. I wonder how Doug Waite felt at that particular time knowing that
Um,
because he's an American kid, he's
yeah,
playing for an American team. He's coming to a team in Canada on the other side of the continent that obviously is the Rangers were contending then.
they
This
were.
team was obviously miles away from even, considering themselves a playoff team at that point.
Definitely, and I actually want to bring up a quote that Waite said. I had it in my article, but when he was inducted into the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame in 2013, I believe he said at the start he didn't know a lot about Edmonton or Western Canada at all when he got traded there. So that was probably a shock to the system at the time. I mean, how old would he have been in '93? About 22, because he's born in
Yeah, he
born in
was he was
'71.
young. He was young.
Right. So, I mean, when we look at Waite, he's 14th all time in Oilers goals, sixth in assists, seventh in points, 13th in power play goals, second in power play assists, fifth in power play points, ninth in shots on goals, 16th in games played. I mean, you could go on and on, but just accomplished a ton. And here's the quote that he had at the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame on December 9th, 2013. He said, I spent over 8 years with the Edmonton Oilers. It's a passionate hockey city with an unmatched tradition. We had a very close young team that proudly made the playoffs my last 5 years in Edmonton prior to a salary cap era, and that was a great feat for us. And that because we had to believe in our core, which had to be done in Edmonton, I really wouldn't trade my time in Edmonton for anything.
That's
So
that's quite a statement.
that's for a kid who didn't know much about Edmonton when he got traded there to spend parts of 9 seasons. I mean, this is a guy who loved his time there, and if anyone on this list was going to get their number retired, I would say that number 39, Doug Waite, would.
And I don't think one thing, as we discuss all these fantastic and impressive numbers, the one thing we didn't even bring up is leadership.
Yeah.
He was another one of these guys that was the captain, the unquestionable leader of this team. He took over from captain when Bucky left, was drafted
Yep.
by Atlanta in the expansion draft. So I think his last 2 seasons here, 99, 2000, 2000, 2001, he was the captain. And the undisputed face of the franchise, heart and soul, all that kind of good stuff. I
Definitely.
would love, like I say, I admire this guy to the end of the world, and
Well,
I don't think he's going to have his number up there, but boy, would I love to see it.
for sure. And I mean, they did honor him. I believe it was the last year that, or was it the first year that Rogers Place was open and they were on, or no, I think it was the last year Rexall Place was in 2015-16 when they were honoring a bunch of past players with little uh, between intermission segments where
Right.
it wasn't shown on television, but the Oilers Twitter account would always tweet out pictures or videos from uh, how they were honoring these guys just as like a give these guys a standing ovation. The one I was actually at was my last game ever at Rexall Place between the Oilers and Ducks, and during a TV timeout they honored Sean Horkoff, so that was kind of cool. to see him getting a standing ovation from the Oilers faithful. But yeah, like just a couple other things I wanted to say on Waite. I mean, we obviously talked about the playing 9 years there, so he's pretty close to that 10-year threshold that we had talked about as well. But you mentioned his leadership, and he although he wasn't the captain at this point, he led the Oilers to playoff upsets in the first round over the Dallas Stars and Colorado Avalanche in 1997 and 1998. Like back-to-back first-round upsets for a team that didn't have a lot of money and didn't have a ton of star power. That's I mean, Curtis Joseph deserves a lot of credit for those wins as well, but you have to tip your cap to what that Oilers team accomplished. And he also led the Oilers in scoring 7 times, which is the second most ever behind only Wayne Gretzky, who led the Oilers in scoring all 9 years that he was in Edmonton. And I think Connor McDavid will probably take, if he spends his whole career in Edmonton, there's a good chance that he could pass Waite and Gretzky there for most times leading the team in scoring. But just the fact that Waite was easily the best player throughout the 1990s for the Edmonton Oilers, I think he would be the first player who would lead off a ring of excellence.
Yeah, and that speaks to much alongside the stat about how he accounted for 43% of the goals that in the
Absolutely,
96 season. The fact that he led
huge
the
contributor.
team 7 straight years speaks to how critical he was. I mean, how much basically if this team was going to win, he was going to have to play good, and he played. That's the other thing too, is the consistency, because so much of what this team's success was predicated on what he did. He could not afford to have off nights, and he didn't.
No, you're absolutely right on that. This was he realized what a big part of the organization he was. I mean, when you don't have the money to bring in superstars in free agency, and you're not able to even keep your own guys. The Oilers were losing their top players year over year, and Waite was among them. You need your top guys to carry that team. I remember being 10 years old and watching the Oilers play the Stars in the playoffs, and my dad would say, the difference between the Oilers and the Stars is the Oilers have one great line, the Stars have 4 great lines, or at least four solid lines. And that's not to take away from the players the Oilers had in their bottom 6. They had a real gritty lunch bucket crew who the fact of the matter just was a lack of talent compared to some of the teams that they were facing in the first round every year. I mean, they barely crawled into the playoffs as the 7th or 8th seed. And then, for all those years, they kept having to play Dallas in the first round of the playoffs. I mean, that they were a perennial Stanley Cup contender at that time. That's about as much as you could ask, that they were able to push them to Game 7 a couple times or win one series.
Yeah, I mean, you hear a lot of the Stars talk about those series, those eras, and even in 2000, well, 99, the Oilers got swept. 2000, it was 4-1. 2001, the series was 4-2. But every single game was close, and you hear the Stars talk about it to this day, and they would say that the Oilers played them as tough as any opponent they had in those years, and that includes whoever they might have met in the conference finals or the Stanley Cup finals.
In 01, wasn't it was a 6-game series in 01, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But I think almost every game in that series was a 1-goal game.
If I believe the last game was a 2-goal game, that's because it was an empty netter.
Okay.
But yeah, if it wasn't a 1-goal game, the second goal was an empty netter. So yeah.
And that was probably their best regular season with Wade on the team. I mean, if you think about it, they finished what, I think they were 6th in the Western Conference that year. So to
Yep.
say that a team on a shoestring budget was the 6th best team out of 15 in the Western Conference, like that just shows what that team did to work their way into that position. And of course they had to play Dallas in the first round again. The one year they move up in the standings is a little bit, Dallas drops down, but man, those series were fun. Even though the Oilers came out on the losing end more than they came out on the winning side, it was a battle every year.
Oh, such great memories of that. And that reminds me of a couple great goals that I will save for when we have that top goals discussion. But yeah, fond memories of those times, even though they lost. Those are some of the greatest memories I have as a sports fan growing up.
For sure. And now we're going to discuss the ESPN 30 for 30 documentary, The Last Dance. We had talked about how much we were looking forward to it back the last time you were on the show. And now that we've watched all 10 episodes, I'd just like to first get a thought from you on how did you like the documentary overall?
Oh, I thought it was a phenomenal documentary. It was absolutely fascinating. It was really well made. The level of access they had is it's mind blowing to think that footage was sitting around for more than 20 years. And then it might not have ever seen the light of day. And you know that was back in the time before really the pre-reality TV era, I guess, when everything was kind of being taped, or before social media, when you're on the cameras all the time. So for them to have that depth of footage is quite remarkable. And so from that side of it, I thought was fantastic. I did find it to be, certainly portrayed through Michael Jordan's perspective more than anything else. And that's a criticism you'll often have of documentaries like this. Someone is going to be the one who has the final say, and they're likely going to maybe enhance some parts of it and flat out leave out other parts of it too. And that's what I kind of found maybe dragged the documentary down towards, especially towards the latter few episodes. But all in all, a fascinating look behind the scenes, incredibly well made. And I don't think, if I'm not going to complain too much too about it being filtered through the Michael Jordan's lens, because I was expecting that going in anyway.
Right. But at the same time, do you think this documentary even would have been made without Jordan having a certain amount of say in it?
And that's just it. And that's why I think you have to take the good with the bad. And it's too bad because, and I've been thinking about this, and there's been some great sport documentaries made over time, but very rarely do you really get to see the true unfiltered picture of things, because there's someone always they has the final say. They have the footage that you need to get. They have the access that you need to get, et cetera, et cetera. And this is just another example of that. And so yeah, I agree. If they hadn't agreed to work around whatever parameters Jordan would have had in place, this never would have seen the light of day, and that would not have been good.
And even though Jordan, I'm sure, did have a certain amount of say in it, he isn't necessarily painted in the best light in every episode, is he?
No, he's not. I think again, it's so hard to say, because he's definitely not painted in the best light, but he may even be painted in a better light than he. I mean, depending on who you hear, or who you believe. There's been books written about him. There's been a lot of stories told over the years that the guy was really miserable behind the scenes, or away from the public eye. And so, even though he didn't come off looking that good, he might have come off looking better than he would have if the full story was out there, or maybe not. So that's that's really, that's only the people who were there will know that. Um, I think one of the complaints that I have heard about it from people is that maybe it wasn't even so much about how he was portrayed, but how the focus was really largely around him, especially towards the last few episodes as well. And guys like, the Scottie Pippens, and the Tony Kukocs, the Steve Kerrs, the Horace Grants, et cetera, didn't really get their just due. But again, if you're making a documentary about the Chicago Bulls, it's going to revolve around Michael Jordan.
Exactly. It's just like if you were to make a documentary about any successful team, the superstar is going to gain a certain amount of the spotlight when you're doing that. Also, this I don't know if you thought about this, but they started filming that doc in 1997 and it came out in 2020. Do you think they intentionally waited the 23 years to do it?
I hadn't even thought about that. I had not thought about that. Well, I don't know, boy. The universe works in mysterious ways. I
Yeah,
hadn't I hadn't even thought about that.
I that
You
kind of
you
just
just blew
caught
my
me.
mind.
I was wondering if Jordan was like, you know what, let's add some branding to this even and wait 23 years to bring it out. But that just kind of something that crossed my mind when
Okay,
I
so
was
I
watching it.
got one for you now. Does that mean that in 2087, the last dance with Gretzky and the Oilers is going to drop?
Well, geez, I hope they do another one with with another doc with Gretzky and the crew before they get that old. So I don't think we're gonna wait that long. But yeah, I guess the boys on the bus came out in 1987. So that would probably be the closest comparison to something like this that I can think of where a documentary has actually followed a team through the whole season. The only difference is that was all in about an hour and a half, 2 hours, whereas this documentary stretched over 10 hours.
Yeah, and I've been thinking an awful lot about drawing comparisons between the two. And what struck me is that Boys on the Bus was probably the original follow along, for lack of a better term, sports documentary. Like,
Mhm.
you think, I mean, there's been a lot of good ones made, especially in recent years, especially since 30 for 30 came out, and they've really pioneered a style of sports documentary now that's become very popular and very common. 1980, well, I think that was made around, is the 86-87 season, right?
It
So,
it starts right before the 1986 playoffs.
right. So they
And
were already working on this back nearly 35 years ago.
right, because I'm pretty sure it opens around March of 86 and they had a road trip to New York City, and then they come back to Edmonton where they swept the Canucks in the first round 3-0. And all the guys are talking about how it barely even felt like a playoff series because they beat them so easily. And then they go into the series against Calgary, and they're not necessarily at the level that they want to be at because they weren't pushed, and then obviously lost to Calgary in disappointing fashion in the second round. And then it kind of follows them all through the next year leading up to obviously beating the Philadelphia Flyers in the 1987 Stanley Cup final.
You might be able to verify this then. I think what happened, if I remember this, I've heard this story before, is that the intention originally was to make a documentary about them winning the third straight one in '86.
Well, that
And
would
of
make
course,
sense.
yeah, and then they got eliminated. And what came out of that is even more compelling story, of course, because
Right.
then it's following the entire next season to redemption, the road to redemption, and but so that really made me appreciate the Boys on the Bus that much more, because it's clearly, I mean, it was so far ahead of his time. Even 10 years later, if we're talking mid 90s, you weren't seeing anything quite like that. But at the same time, and you mentioned perfectly, Eric, that was only an hour and a half. Can you imagine if they had 10 hours to work with? Because there's 10 hours of stories to be told with that team.
Will definitely be. I mean, one thing I really like about that documentary is in the middle, they sort of take a few minutes and talk about each specific player and what they meant to the team. And for a lot of those guys, it's about 30 seconds of discussion on them. If they would have had the extra time to really expand and talk about everything that they do on and off the ice and how each player sort of fits into this team. I think that would have been really interesting, and then they probably could have stretched it to 10 episodes, but I'm not sure anyone was even thinking of doing something that long back then. I mean, even myself, when I first heard about the 10-part series for The Last Dance, that seemed really long because the previous longest one they had done was OJ Simpson's Made in America back in 2016, which was a 5-parter.
Yeah, and there really wasn't. I mean, just the fact that they got the green light to make what they did make with Boys on the Bus is pretty cool, because there was no platform for that back then. I mean, I don't think TSN was even around until about 1990. I mean, there's just nothing. There was no. They were going to sell that as a home video, and that was it. There was no other platform for distribution. So I think the concept of even even thinking about doing something beyond, the length of an average documentary wouldn't have even crossed their minds, because there just was no avenue to distribute that kind of content back then.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. Maybe they're sitting on hours and hours and hours of footage, and they can get back to doing the full thing. I mean, that could be possible. I mean, they obviously followed the team for a large chunk of that season and playoffs. Who knows how much film they had to chop?
Well, yeah, I mean, if they would have done 10 parts, and let's say it would have been on CBC or something, you could have put one episode every Saturday for 10 weeks after Hockey Night in Canada or before Hockey Night in Canada. There was endless possibilities for that, but I'm just glad that they did make that documentary about a team that means so much to me and to most Oilers fans, really. So let's kind of get into the specifics of this episode now. Um, so, all right, there's a lot to unpack in the opening hour of this documentary. They started by looking at Jordan's college career at North Carolina and his rise to fame in the NBA. But it begins with the 1997-98 Bulls seeking their sixth title in 8 years, and Michael Jordan's frustrations with general manager Jerry Krause wanting to break up the dynasty and rebuild the team at the conclusion of the season. And they were clearly trying to establish Krause as a villain or heel, to borrow a wrestling term, right off the hop. And while Krause built the dynasty around Jordan in Chicago, it seemed like he was strongly disliked by a lot of players, and even head coach Phil Jackson towards the end, who Krause was planning to let go at the end of the season as well. So my question to you is, how much credit does Krause deserve for putting together the Bulls and all the success that they achieved in the 90s? And do you think they would have won a seventh title in 1999 if they had stayed together?
Yes, I do think they would have won a seventh title. That comes with an asterisk with it, because that season was a strike shortened or a lockout shortened season, and it was only 50 games. It was a real sprint from the get go, and all sorts of crazy things happened. We had some teams that might not have otherwise made the playoffs sneak in, and teams that would have made the playoffs not get out. Or not get in, sorry. The number 8 seed New York Knicks in the Eastern Conference went all the way to the NBA Finals. I mean, they just snuck into the playoffs, and they just got hot at the right time, just because it was such a shortened season. It didn't start till February. Guys were locked out until January. I mean, it was all sorts of goofy things happened that year. If it was a normal year, I would say for sure, I think they would have won a seventh. Under that circumstances, anything could have happened. But Kraus gets as Kraus, I think, deserves a lot of credit where for building that team. Um, just as much as he put it this way, he deserves as much credit for building it as he deserves for destroying it. And I think people focus more on the latter than the former, because they might not have, six, four, five, six titles without him doing what he did to create that team and put that team together. At the same time, it was his actions that caused the team to not be able to go for number seven. And then if they get number seven, do they go for number eight, and so on and so on?
Yeah, and Jordan even says in the documentary he wanted to defend the title until they lost it. And I'm not sure if I fully believe him on that. Do you really think that he wanted to keep going until they finally dropped it? Because I feel like part of him wanted to go out on top.
He's such an ultra competitive guy. I think he would, if Phil Jackson, if it was the environment where Phil Jackson's still there, Scottie Pippen's still there, etc., I think he would have kept coming back. He's as long as they had the title to defend, and I think that was uh, that was exemplified when he came back and joined the Washington Wizards for 3 seasons, or 2 seasons, sorry, in 2001, 2, and 2002, 3. That hunger just to get back out there would drive him. I think he would have kept going. I think it was just too much in his DNA. He was too much of a competitor, that he would have kept going as long as that nucleus was together. As it was, I mean, he had the perfect ending of all time in sports, really. I mean,
Mhm.
until he came back to Washington, winning your sixth state championship, going out on top with probably the most I'll say the most famous shot in basketball history, and probably, rank it up with any sport, one of the top 4 or 5 plays in any team sport ever. That was the perfect scripted ending, and and that's probably why they ended the documentary on that instead of touching on the fact that, oh, he happened to come back here 3 or 4 years later and it didn't quite go so well.
Yeah. So in episode 2, the big storyline is Scottie Pippen's contract. By 1997, he was easily one of the best players in the world, but he wasn't even one of the top 100 paid players in the league. So after winning the 1991 NBA title, Pippen signed a 5-year contract extension with the Bulls worth $18 million when he still had 2 years remaining on his contract. Uh, do you think he should have waited until 93 to re-sign, and how much more could he have actually made if he would have just waited a couple more years and re-signed? Because I know he said that he needed the financial security to take care of his family, but I feel like he missed out on making so much more over those next 5 seasons.
He did, and that's the risk that he took. When he signed that deal, I don't think he could have had any idea the success that the team would have, and the popularity of the NBA that would explode to the point where contracts were awarded that would be so much more than that. It was at the time that he signed it. It was within the context of that time was a very generous offer. And he took it, and it was a risk because obviously you're locking yourself in. And I look at this, I've compared this a lot to the situation the Oilers are in, and the long term contract that Connor McDavid has signed. What if NHL values in the next 3 or 4 years just explode, and all of a sudden he could become the most grossly underpaid athlete in all of professional sports, and he has 3 or 4 or 5 years left on that deal? Do we fault him? Do we fault the Oilers? Are the Oilers not treating him right if they refuse to renegotiate that deal?
Yeah.
It's a very when athletes sign a long-term deal like that, that's the risk that you take. And I don't know. It's such a tough question because you want to do right by it, but at the same time, if that athlete signs a ridiculous deal and by the end of it he's not performing, he's not giving that money back.
No, and look, when Connor signed that 8-year, $100 million contract extension in 2017, he became the highest paid player in NHL history. But I kind of had a feeling that over the next 8 years, someone would take that away from him and would become the new highest paid player. Matthews is probably most likely to do it because he took a 5-year contract in Toronto, allowing him to become a free agent at a younger age. And while he'll potentially pass him in a few years when it comes to renegotiating, I still believe that when Connor signs his next deal in 6 years, or hopefully he re-ups even sooner than that with Edmonton, but I believe that his new deal will once again set the standard for highest paid player in the league anyway.
When he does re-sign, where do you think he will rank? Let's say he plays out the contract. So we're
Yeah.
looking at 6 years down the line. At that point in time, where do you think that contract will rank among the tops in the NHL?
Ooh, I
I think he'll be
can't.
passed over a few times by then.
So we're talking the 2025-26 season. So
Yeah,
yeah, starting 5 years from now. I can't imagine that there's too many guys who are ahead of him, even then.
I look at it like
Maybe
the
two or
money,
three at most.
the
Like that's
money.
that's still huge money.
It is. It is. I look at how the contracts have grown in recent years, and there's stuff that seven,
Okay.
8 years ago I couldn't wrap my head around. Um,
Well, how about this?
and I
Leon
guess of course
Draisaitl.
the salary cap plays a big part in this too, right? What they're going to have be able to commit to players.
Right. And sorry to cut you off there. I was just jumping in. Leon Draisaitl, his deal's up in 2025. So he's a free agent a year before Connor. He's going to go up from 8.5 million. You know, is his next deal 12? Is it more than 12 and a half. I mean, there will be players who are pushing in that category. What about this new kid who's coming into the league, Alexis Lafreniere, going first
Yeah,
overall?
yeah,
By the time
exactly.
he's done his entry level deal, is his next deal for 13 or 13 and a half million. So there could be a few guys, but still, even 6 years from now, I don't think there's going to be like 10 guys who make 13 million or more.
And I think a lot of it is the personality too. I don't see Draisaitl or McDavid, for example, being as put off as Jordan or well, in this case, Pippen would have been being underpaid. But I mean, let's say Draisaitl gets now when Draisaitl becomes a free agent, how many years before McDavid?
1 year.
1 year. Okay. So yeah, if they'll probably be okay that way. Like if there was a difference of say 3 years and Draisaitl got a big contract, and let's say he's making like I don't know 4 or 5 million more than McDavid a year,
Yeah.
does that upset McDavid?
I don't think so for the 1 year. I mean, look, in 2017-18, that was the first year of Leon's big contract when he was making 8.5 million. And Connor, even with all his bonuses, was only making 3.75 million. So Leon right there was 5 million ahead of him for that 1 year. Connor knew that the big money was kicking in the next year. So I just don't think that that's going to really bother him too much. But and then I heard someone say that Scottie Pippen actually earned more than Michael Jordan in his NBA career. Obviously not from his endorsements, where Jordan absolutely trumped everyone. But uh, did you hear that Pippen actually out earned him from NBA career?
I haven't heard that, but I could believe it because I mean he kept playing. He went on to play with Houston, with Portland. He actually came back and finished his career in Chicago. But yeah, he played several more seasons with the Rockets than the Blazers, and he was really just an above average player by that point, and he was making a ridiculous amount of money. And so he eventually got paid. It wasn't by the Bulls, but I mean, but at that point in time in his career, that's the perfect example. He was making a lot more than he was worth. So it would not surprise me because Jordan never really played when money started to get really stupidly big terms into the early 2000s. Jordan only played
Yeah.
2 years in that period of time. And Jordan never took it. Jordan took these 1 year deals that were structured to allow the Bulls to go out and sign other major free agents. So I honestly would not be surprised if Pippen made more money in the end. I guess maybe there's a bit of poetic justice in there somewhere.
I just Googled it right now, and the first thing that popped up is a site called basketballforever.com, and it says all in all, Pippen finished his career with salary earnings of 109.9 million, while Jordan finished with 89.7 million, which means Pippen earned 20 million more than Jordan in his career.
Wow. And the majority of that would have been made by Pippen when he was. I mean, so he was as underpaid as he was in those years in Chicago. He was probably overpaid in those years in Portland.
And sometimes you just make it up later. And I think we've seen teams in all sports sometimes make that mistake of paying players for what they've already done, rather than what they're going to do. Which is another reason why I didn't mind Draisaitl getting the huge contract he got in 2017, because look how that's paid off in the last 3 years.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm always, like I say, my only hesitance with this, and I'd say this for any teams in any sports, when they sign these long-term deals to players and they're like, oh, they got him at a good rate. But I always think to myself, yeah, they got him at a good rate, but halfway through this 8 year deal, is that player going to be upset and demand that he's not say, I'm not going to play unless you renegotiate my deal? And if that's the case, then what good is this contract you signed him to begin with anyway?
Hmm. No, definitely. I mean, uh, you never know how these deals are going to play out, really. So uh, I'm just, from an Oilers perspective, which most of the people listening to this podcast are Oilers fans. I think that we're all happy with how Draisaitl's deal has worked out, and I think we all knew McDavid was going to be a steal at 12 and a half, and having those two guys under contract for a combined 21 million, if my math is right, that's not a bad deal.
Yeah, and I think I just think the attitude of those two guys is one you don't have to worry about. But I'm sure somewhere along the line in the next few years, because I mean the Oilers are going to have to. They've got a lot of promising young players that are going to be commanding some really significant contracts, and there's probably going to be an ugly negotiation or two down the road here in the next few
Yeah.
years.
I'm I would that's the one I shouldn't say the one, but it's one of the things that this COVID situation has really hurt the league because they said that there isn't expected to be any rise in the salary cap for the next 2 years. And I was anticipating that a year from now, the salary cap could jump even $5 million with the new US TV deal coming up and Seattle entering the league. So now that they're saying that it's going to be staying right around 85.5 million, teams are going to have to watch their pennies a little closer now because they might not be able to go sign that big $10 million free agent they thought they were going to be able to get if the salary cap had even went up a couple million.
and I wonder if the players themselves recognize that when they're going into negotiations, or if ultimately the market will dictate what they can command. And if someone
Absolutely.
else is willing to pay them more elsewhere, but if those other teams are facing the same salary constraints, maybe there aren't the ridiculous offers that are tossed around that kind of throws the whole market off kilter.
Definitely. So, episode 3 focused mainly on the Bulls' rivalry with the Detroit Pistons and Dennis Rodman's antics off the court. And that's another thing about this doc. It kind of bounced back and forth. They would be showing some footage from 97, then it would go back to 91 and even back to the 80s at certain times. So it was all over the place there. And actually, I didn't find it too confusing. It was kind of cool that they went back and forth to different eras throughout the 13 or 14 years Jordan was in Chicago. So yeah, like I said, the rivalry the Bulls had with the Pistons in the late 80s and the early 90s, and also when Dennis Rodman joined the team, uh, everything that went on around him. So I'll just ask you, what I don't know if you were following it at all at that point, but what did that series mean to the NBA? That rivalry that they had in the back to back years that they lost to the Pistons in the playoffs until they finally beat them, and also was the headache that Rodman caused off the court worth what he brought to the team on the court?
I guess it depends on which team you're referring to. Not the San
With
Antonio Spurs would tell you no. The
with
Chicago
the
Bulls would
Bulls, we'll
certainly
say.
tell you yes. Yeah, no, what that rivalry meant. That's a great question. That's a great question. I
Because
think
it
it
looked very physical. I mean, the abuse that Jordan took in that series and how he started working out more and more after those losses so that he could take the abuse and kind of give some back. That was what caught my eye in this episode.
Yeah, and I mean that really was. I mean, the Bulls needed to go through that. I think Michael Jordan needed to go through that. All the team, Scottie Pippen needed to go through that. You could see you could see the difference in the way they responded. There's that famous scene where Pippen gets knocked, just gets absolutely clobbered, and then just gets right back up and shakes it off. I think it was in the '91 playoffs when they finally do break through and win the championship. That shows just how much they've grown. And I mean, it was from those experiences and those losses to Detroit that made them go that way. And so many times in sports, the teams just inevitably have to go through that growing pains. It's very rare that a young team arrives on the scene and immediately rises to that championship level. And again, the parallels are so many with the Oilers. You see it with the Oilers. I mean, they were so good, so soon, but yet they took their lumps a couple of notable ways. That LA series, when they were just shocked, they had a shocking meltdown and were knocked out of the playoffs. And then when they first got to the Stanley Cup Finals against the Islanders, and they realized
Yeah.
the stage that they were on, and the Islanders just, they just took it to them, and before they'd even know it, the series was over.
I mean, great point there. Like in 81, they upset the great Montreal Canadiens, who were just 2 years away from or 2 years past their dynasty. And in 81, 82, they had become an elite team in the league. and then all of a sudden in '82 they suffer a terrible loss to the LA Kings in the playoffs where they were upset, and then the following year they do make it to the Stanley Cup final, like you said, but uh, had to learn that lesson of what it takes to win before they actually eventually got the cup in '84. So yeah, there. It always seems like there's that one team you have to overcome to eventually get the championship, and for the Bulls it was the Pistons. And yeah, but just to kind of expand on Dennis Rodman, what did you think about all the footage and the when they were discussing the little vacation he took to Vegas?
It's pretty crazy. No one else on any other team could get away with that. It was a unique situation on that Bulls team because Phil Jackson knew that if he was going to get the most out of Dennis Rodman, he had to allow him this bit of leeway, this bit of freedom, I guess. Freedom probably isn't the right word for it, but his to go to do things that other players would not be allowed to get away with, and so he let Rodman have that space. But what I found was really fascinating about the situation is on most teams, if the coach treats one player that way with one set of rules and everyone else on the team is playing by another set of rules, that's going to create friction. But there seemed to be this universal understanding amongst the Bulls teammates that if we're going to get the most out of Dennis on the court, that we got to let Dennis be Dennis off the court, and they were genuinely okay with him going. I mean, obviously he pushed it too far sometimes, like having to knock on his door for practice, and
Yeah.
like that famous sequence. But for the most part, they let Dennis be Dennis, and they were good with it. And I think it's because there was this universal understanding amongst that team and the players, and that speaks volumes because that you just would not see that
Well,
on many teams.
I mean, for sure. And Phil and Dennis were both two guys who kind of went to the beat of their own drum. I mean, they talked about what Phil was like growing up and how he was kind of a bit of a hippie in Montana himself as a young man. So maybe he sort of understood Dennis like few others. And I think my favorite part is when Michael Jordan, like you said, had to go to Vegas and knock on his door, and who answers the door but Carmen Electra at the height of her Baywatch fame, and she said that she was just like wrapped in a blanket or something, and then tried to hide because she couldn't believe Michael Jordan was at the door. I thought that was just a hilarious scene.
I mean, but that was it. That's how absolutely crazy things got. Things got so crazy that the Bulls played an NBA Finals game on Sunday in Utah, and no, sorry, in Chicago, and then or was it Utah? Anyway, whatever it is, and then the following night on Monday Nitro, which on the other side of the country,
Yeah,
Dennis Rodman's attacking Diamond Dallas Page with a steel chair, and then 2 nights later he's back on the court again, playing in the
yeah,
NBA Finals.
that
I mean, this is like you just think about that for a second. Try to contextualize that. You
he was.
can't.
Oh, I mean, he was really just trying to get his name into anything he could, and I think he was a wrestling fan too. He said so. I'm not surprised that they brought him in for an angle on WCW. But he had also done an action movie with Jean Claude Van Damme around that time, I believe. I saw it years ago. I
Double
can't
team.
Double Team, yeah. Which I'm a big Jean Claude fan, and that movie wasn't actually as bad as I thought it was going to be with the two of them. It was all right. The one hilarious thing is that Dennis Rodman's hair is a different color in almost every scene in that movie, which I and they never address it in the film, which I think is also pretty funny. So yeah, that there's Dennis Rodman was definitely one of the most interesting basketball characters of that era, and uh, to think that he was such a vital part of the team while all that was going on, it just shows what he really meant to the team especially as a defensive player.
And I'd like to get your thought on this real quick too. Could any of this have happened? Could they have been able to
Oh
function the team function successfully doing what they did in the social media era?
no, I can't imagine with Twitter and Snapchat and everything that this could have ever happened today. It's just I think that the organization would have been roasted by Stephen A. Smith or just
Yeah.
any of the basketball insiders if this was allowed to go on today. But the one last thing I'll say about Pippen or not Pippen, excuse me, Rodman before we move on is that when Scottie Pippen was not playing during the 97-98 season for an extended period of time, Dennis really stepped up and was very focused, wasn't he?
He was. I mean, he could when he wanted to be all in. You know,
And
he
the
was he was as good as anybody.
but his vacation didn't happen until after Scotty rejoined the team, right? It's like he was almost burnt out from having to be that dialed in.
Yeah, and I thought the documentary did a great job of capturing that. It really did. It really did. And it's just it's when you just try and think about this and looking at it through the lens of 2020 and how this all would have it just couldn't have happened now. And it's that was, you know, the circumstances. It was just a perfect storm. Just a perfect storm is probably the best way to describe it.
For sure. So we'll skip ahead to episode 4, where they show the Bulls beating the Lakers to win their first NBA title in 1991. And it also kind of explored Phil Jackson's unique philosophy and approach to coaching. Um, and Jordan said that by winning a championship in his 7th NBA season, that he could finally be mentioned in the same category as legends like Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. Even though Jordan had already been considered the best basketball player in the world for, I think, several years by this point, what did winning a championship do for his legacy? And also, we just kind of touched on this before, but what did you think of Phil's coaching methods?
Oh, I thought Phil was brilliant. Yeah, no, I just thought he was absolutely brilliant because he knew how to push all the right buttons, and he would do such incredibly unorthodox things that would leave everybody else scratching their head. And I mean, to example, would just like we were talking about how he treated Rodman. I think Phil is an absolute genius, and he was able to make it work with those groups of players in those eras. We've seen since that. I mean, he was great with the Lakers, but his efforts with the Knicks were pretty much a disaster. So I mean, as the eras go and as people's attitudes change and the way athletes are changed, it wouldn't work today, but it sure did work then. And as to your point about Michael Jordan, I mean, it solidified until that point. The thing had hung over him that he couldn't win the big one because they couldn't get past Detroit. And we see that all the time, again, in athletes and pro sports. They don't win the big one until they get that cup, that ring, that solidifies their reputation. Look at a perfect example: the Hockey Hall of Fame debates. The guys that get left out are often the guys that don't have that ring, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that seems to be such a compelling argument for why a guy should get in. And often the guys that get left out, I mean, Curtis Joseph's been sitting on the sidelines forever, and he probably will. And the only critique anyone has about him is that he has no rings. And this just, again, winning that championship solidifies that reputation, and that's a recurring theme across sports,
For
across
sure.
generations.
And he's one of the winningest goalies in NHL history, and he's, you know, I don't remember one year in recent memory where they've they've mentioned him as like a front runner to get in.
No, he has his stats blow away some other goalies that are in there. The
Yeah, like
difference is those other
Rogie
goalies have
Vachon
rings.
got in
Yeah.
recently, and I mean he had to wait like 35 years for his chance. But yeah, you'd think that Curtis Joseph would eventually get in. So yeah,
You look
that's
at the guys that got left out this year, though. Your Daniel Alfredsons. I
McGillney.
mean, yeah, guys that did not win the rings, but then the slam dunk guy that gets in. Well, I mean, Iginla was a Hall of Famer regardless.
Hmm.
But you look at Hossa, for example. I mean, he won what, I think 3 straight championships with 3 different teams or something like that.
Well, he went to 3 straight finals in 08, 09, 2010. Lost with the Penguins in 08, lost with the Red Wings in 09, and then finally got the cup in 2010.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So again, that seems to be the validation.
Yeah. Yeah, and for sure. And
And
then he added
basketball's
two
no
more
different.
rings after that, in 2013 and 2015. So this that was a big reason why I assumed he would get in too. Um, So let's move on to episode 5 now. This is where Jordan's greatness is really starting to take off to an unprecedented level. And after winning back-to-back NBA titles in 91 and 92 and a gold medal at the 92 Olympics with the Dream Team, MJ was basically a global superstar. And to me, the best part of this episode was watching the practice games that Team USA was having. So I'll ask you, what did Jordan and the 92 Dream Team do for the game of basketball on a global scale? And what are your thoughts on Isaiah Thomas being left off the team?
Oh boy, the Isaiah question. Um, Isaiah probably deserved to be on that team. I think they can say whatever they want and they can dance around it however they want. I think if if you hooked everybody up to a lie detector, they would tell you the reason that Isaiah Thomas was on that team, because if he was on that team, Michael Jordan would not be on that team. And if Michael Jordan was refused to be on that team, then who knows who else refuses to be on that team.
Yeah.
So yep, that's pretty much the final answer I can give to that.
Okay.
But as far as for what that team did for the game, that's right around when I first fell in love with basketball. It first came on my radar. I think you can see the fact that they go into the Olympics, of course, were in Barcelona, Spain that year, and the international superstars that they were becoming that put basketball. They had that global platform. They capitalized on it, and basketball really took off on an international scale from that point on. And it's been, again, the parallels with hockey are so fascinating because it's something that hockey's been trying to capitalize on ever since. And I mean, they finally got it in the Olympics in '98. They realized what an incredible platform this could be for their sport. The benefit the basketball has is that it occurs in the off season. So you got a real buy-in and commitment from all these guys, and they did have a real feel of a team. It's not like 2 weeks ago I was playing for somebody else, and 2 weeks from now I'm going to be playing for somebody else again, and these guys who I'm playing with right now are going to be on the other side. It's like from June through July through August, they were all together, and they really did become a team, and you could sense that. And I'm not sure, Eric, if you've seen the Dream Team documentary.
I actually haven't. No.
Okay, yeah, if you get a chance to watch that, it's another
Yeah, I
30 for
should.
30. Absolutely fantastic. Provides some great subtext too for when you watch The Last Dance. Um, it shows that just the impact that that team had. And but yeah, Isaiah probably should have been there.
Because,
That's
I
for
mean,
sure. It's so funny that 28 years later, this is still a thing.
like, look, they obviously didn't need him to win, but at the same time, if he deserves to be there based on merit, then he should be there. And I believe the coach of the team was the Pistons coach too, right?
Which makes it even crazier.
I know. I can't believe he didn't fight for his guy to get there or anything. But the thing is, like that, you talked about this on the last or the last episode we did, that Jordan is kind of petty at times, and even in his Hall of Fame speech, you said he threw shade at people. So this could be another one of those times where he's like, I won't play on this Olympic team unless I get things my way. Even though he said in the documentary that he never actually said, I don't want to be on the team if Isaiah's on the team. When they called him to play, he just asked, is who I think the guy who we think we're talking about, is he on the team? And they said, no, he's not on the team. And he said, well, then I'll play. So it sounds like he indirectly kind of told them that if
Oh
Isaiah's on
yeah,
the team, but
yeah.
that's what he's saying in the documentary. He might have, in actuality, come out and completely said, if Isaiah's there, I'm not there.
Oh, they know what the answer would have been if they had to ask him, so they didn't ask him.
Yeah.
I mean, the intimations he sent out, the signals that he sent out, I think were quite obvious. That whether it was the question was ever actually presented to him in that manner or not, I think is irrelevant, because it was made crystal clear
Yeah.
by everybody that it was made crystal clear by him, and everyone was completely understanding that there was no way he was going to be on the team if Isaiah was on there. But yeah, you hit it with Chuck Daly, the Pistons coach, was the coach of the Dream Team, and he still couldn't get on there. It shows you the stroke of influence that Jordan had. But again, when you look back in history and you're asking about the impact that the Dream Team had, they don't have a monicum of that if Jordan's not on that team.
Right. Well, he
Yeah, so
elevated the group.
all these things are correct. Was Thomas robbed by not being, or was he wronged by not being on that team? Yes, he was. Did he deserve to be on that team? Yes, he was. Is Jordan petty? Yes, he was. Did they do the right thing by putting Jordan on the team? If you look at what it meant to the game of basketball and the NBA, again, all these things can be right and wrong at the same time.
For sure. And this is kind of a side note too, but did you like when they showed they were starting to talk about, how Jordan's personal brand was growing around this time. Did you like when they showed the old Gatorade commercial and when they showed the Nike commercials that he was doing at the time?
It sent me down a rabbit hole of old commercials.
Yeah,
Because there are so many great old Michael Jordan commercials. A lot of them didn't even make it in the documentary. Yeah, I probably spent a good hour at one point in time there just looking at all these great old commercials. There were some classics.
and I couldn't believe that he actually didn't want to sign with Nike. He wanted to be with Adidas because
Yeah.
Nike hadn't really developed their brand as a basketball company yet, and the only reason he even took the meeting with them is because his mom made him go in and at least hear what they had to say.
How different is our world today if Michael Jordan was an Adidas guy and not a Nike guy?
Wow. You wonder, hey, because I mean the Air Jordan brand and everything would never have come to be. So that really changed a big part of not just sports history, but it kind of goes into pop culture.
Oh yeah, it completely crosses over into pop culture, and it's that was probably one of the top three or four most mind blowing things that I got out of that documentary. Because that's one thing
Yeah.
I did not know before, is that he was not he was not going to be a Nike guy at first. It's kind of funny to look back. I mean, Nike isn't anything of what they are with it. Nike should be paying Michael Jordan $4 billion in royalties for every year for the rest of his life.
Definitely. So in episode 6, this is where Jordan's reputation starts to take a pretty big hit after uh, his excessive gambling gets exposed, and there's a book written about him by a Chicago sports writer, and the Bulls did complete their three-peat. I know this is probably tough for you, but beating the Phoenix Suns in the 1993 NBA Final. So I'll ask you, as a Suns fan, did this bring back good memories or bad memories for you?
It just brings back memories. Honestly, that's still my favorite playoff series of all time. Because it was that series that made me fall in love with the Suns, just because they fought so hard. I mean, they went down 2-0 and were headed to Chicago for 3 straight games, needing to win two just to get back to Phoenix. And just the fact that they were able to do that is one of one of the most incredible accomplishments anyone has played. Any team that played against the Bulls in that era, I think that was probably the greatest accomplishment of any of those opponents.
Charles
So
Barkley
I
had some
watch those
great
games all the
clips
time.
too.
So yeah. Um, so
Like the
no,
Sun-
so it doesn't bring back. It just like I say, I've seen those games so many times over the years, and it's just some of the greatest basketball that to me.
oh,
Um, yeah. So, but I'm sorry,
definitely.
I got sidetracked there. What was your original question?
No, I was just saying. I mean the shot that John Paxson hit. I just want to say like that. That was a great shot. But even throughout that documentary, just some of the things that Charles Barkley was saying in that episode, he gave some great clips, and where he said that that was the first time ever he felt like he wasn't the best basketball player on the court when he lost to Michael, and when he told them to take those boards down, how all the windows were boarded up around Chicago and things like that. He uh, he definitely had a bit of a wrestling persona himself, didn't he?
Oh, he could cut a promo. That interview you're talking about there. He was what he gave to NBC after Game 5. So that's when they won. They were down 3-1, and the Game 5 was in Chicago. And of course, everyone's preparing for the big post-game celebration and the rioting in the streets. So yeah. So afterwards, he says, "You can take down the board, Chicago. There'll be no rioting tonight." And then he goes on to say that I think he's asked something to the effect of what gave you guys the confidence you're going to win, and he says, "Well, God told me we were going to win tonight."
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's just he just goes on. It's just a great promo. I mean, you could tell
But
too that he's tongue in cheek while he's saying it. Like he's kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, playing along the whole time. but
Yeah.
just great. And the best part one was after Game 6 when they lost at home. He says, "I'm still going to Disneyland."
Yeah. and and then they talk to him in present day when they interview him for this doc, and he said like there's no shame in losing to Michael. You know, we came as close as you could possibly come to winning the championship. So you know, good on the Suns getting that far. But when all that stuff about his gambling was coming out, this was just shortly after he was on top of the world in 92, and then everything starts to kind of come crashing down in 93 after that win. So it must have been a very whirlwind sort of time in Michael Jordan's life.
Yeah, I can't put I can't put myself in his shoes and even begin to imagine. This is not to justify or excuse, or even try to begin to understand any of the things that were going on.
Yeah.
But just if you look at, of course, I'm sure, excuse me, you're going to get into the situation with the tragic situation with his father.
Yeah.
All this, such highs and lows in the course of weeks. It's I can't I don't know. I couldn't be able to comprehend it myself.
And we don't have to go too deep into how he lost his father. Like we obviously know he was murdered at the side of the road. And I think his NBA ring that was on his finger was stolen by some kids and later recovered. But uh, obviously, that was the low of lows for Jordan. And this was only a few weeks after the '93 NBA final, I believe. So I think it's pretty well documented. Even before seeing this documentary, we all know that Michael Jordan lost his father, and there were rumors uh, that someone had got to him because of an unpaid gambling debt or something. Like I don't think that there's really any truth to that rumor. I'm as far as they showed in the documentary, it was kind of a random incident, but obviously still a very difficult part in Jordan's life. The main thing I want to talk about from episode 7, though, is when Jordan shocks the world and retires from the NBA in 1993 uh, to go play minor league baseball the following season. How surprised were you at the time when Jordan walked away from the game to give baseball a shot?
I was so surprised. There's like four memories of sports that I can remember from the first 11 years or 12 years of my life, and that would be one of them. And I remember we were over at our neighbor's house for a barbecue when we found out, because it was major news, and I just remember being I feel terrible for saying this, but you'll have to forgive me because I was a kid at the time. My first thought wasn't, "Oh man, Michael Jordan, the game has lost one of its best players," or feeling empathy for him because of everything he'd been going through in his personal life at that point in time. My first reaction was like, "Someone other than the Bulls is going to win now."
Yeah,
Like I
and
was
and
just because I'd been watching them like trample over everybody else for the last few years. I'm like, "Hey, the Suns are going to do it now, or the Jazz are going
yeah,
to
I was
do it
gonna
now, or
say,
something." That was my first thought, but I was stunned, and I remember so clear to this day. And think of how old he was then, and he was considered the
30.
greatest player in the game at that time. Unbelievable. And these are all things again. And like the question I asked you earlier, Eric, is can you imagine if any of this kind of stuff unfolded during the social media era?
Oh yeah. I mean, I just try to even think about Wayne Gretzky. If What if he would have walked away from the LA Kings in 1991 to go try and make it as a pitcher with the Toronto Blue Jays? Because he loved baseball too growing up
And
and
even
was
more
a
so, it's
pretty good player too from what I've heard. So
yeah.
can you imagine if he's like, at the peak of his fame in LA, where hockey is starting to really take off in the United States in the early 90s, and he leaves the game to go try something else. Like it's unthinkable that Jordan did this. And it just like I was just going to say, I'm sure that you were kind of thrilled saying, yes, 94 is going to be our year. The Suns are going to get it.
No, that's what I was saying at the time, and later on, I came to feel I actually feel pretty terrible about that because I mean
How?
the circumstances around what led him to do that obviously it had a lot had to do with his father, but he
Yeah.
did that when he had won
Hmm.
three straight championships. He had the chance. I mean that team they could have. who knows how many they could have won. And for him to go out in the middle of that, it was just absolutely astonishing, especially because there had been no indication of it leading up to it beforehand.
And just quickly, I haven't looked this up, but how did the Suns do in the following 2 years when Jordan was away from the game?
The Houston Rockets, who went on to win the
They won
championship
both,
both
I know.
years, knocked them out.
Oh,
So
they knocked
they
them out both
lost.
times. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So they lost to the eventual champion 3 straight years. Yeah.
Well, that must have been a bit of a tough pill to swallow for you, but at the same time, they were clearly a fairly good team in that era.
They're the greatest uncrowned champions of all time.
Well, that's
At least
that's
that's what I say.
that's a good title to hold. uh, I wonder if the OKC Thunder of the early 2010s would have maybe given them a bit of a push for that, but that team never could stay together, could they either?
No, and so few of the teams do, which is what made the Bulls so special.
Yep. So I think episode 8 was my favorite in the entire series. After losing in the 1995 Eastern Conference Final, it seemed to fuel Jordan to work harder than ever to get back on top. So this is obviously when he had come back to the league, I think with what, about 20 games left in the 94-95 season.
Yeah, yeah,
This is
about that. Yeah.
following the strike in baseball, and uh, he said that he wasn't going to be one of the scab players who would cross the picket line and play in the MLB after playing some double A ball for the 94 season. But then the following season, after that disappointing loss to, I believe, the Orlando Magic in 95, right?
Yes, yes. The Magic are the only team to eliminate, well, in that period of time, only to eliminate a Michael Jordan Bulls team. Yeah.
Right. And the following season, the Bulls had this incredible 72-10 record and won the NBA title. But my favorite part of this episode was the green screen footage on the Warner Brothers lot where Jordan is on the set of Space Jam. Because
Oh boy.
I
Yeah.
was 7 years old when that movie came out in '96, and I loved it. So my question to you is, it's a two-part question. Are the 95-96 Bulls the best team ever? And were you also a Space Jam fan back in the day?
Oh, I love it. Back in the day, I am today.
I still am today.
Yeah, yeah. No, I absolutely love that movie. That movie is so much fun.
And they were making number two with
With
LeBron.
LeBron.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. We'll see how that goes. We'll see how that goes.
I'm
It's always
interested.
tough to when you have such a great movie. The sequel is it's always tough to top it. You and I had some great movie conversations over the
Oh,
years, and have been
definitely.
talking about what how few times I think we did have a conversation once about sequels that are actually better than the original, and it
Well,
was a pretty short list.
yeah, I've just off the top of my head, I think Terminator 2
Yep,
is is the best sequel ever for any movie because
I would agree.
it's
Yeah,
heads and tails better than the original, right?
yep.
And there are some sequels, and I'm not saying just for action movies. There are sequels to movies where people will say, "Oh, that held up. That it wasn't so much worse than the original." But that is one example where the sequel is absolutely more loved by the fans than the original.
Exactly. That's the first one that comes to mind for me too. Um, and yeah, it's so rare. It's tough to replicate. But yeah, that was pretty cool to see how they made Space Jam and see all the guys on the lot and hear the stories about how they made it.
I didn't
It's
know
even
they did so much for Jordan, though. They put in a practice court for him. They flew in other NBA players for him to practice against. He was up at like 5 a.m. to get ready to be on set. And then when he was done at like 7 p.m. at night, he would work out for an hour and then go play these practice games. Like, it must have been some very long, hard days for him.
it's absolutely mind blowing to think that in the space of about 18 months, he went from playing baseball full time to going back to playing basketball full time to winning a championship to filming a movie in the summer to going back and winning another championship and then winning another championship after that
Yeah.
after taking a couple months off one summer, just one summer. But yeah, to I don't know how he had the energy to do that.
Well,
Like I
that That's the one thing I
Crazy.
wish they would have explored a little more in the documentary. It just jumps to him on the set of the movie with guys in complete green screen outfits just trying to defend him as they're the Monstars. And uh they just go right to it without any explanation of how that movie was signed on, how it came to be. I would have liked them to kind of discuss that a little bit. And I'm sure that they were short for time, but with 10 episodes, you feel like they could have spent a little bit of time kind of diving into that. But they seem to be more interested to show not just him making the movie, but everything he was doing off the set when he was preparing for the 95-96 season.
Yeah, I guess within the context of the film, that's probably was the most important thing to get across. But I
Right.
agree with you. I would have loved to see more. I find it really cool that you said you were 7 when you first saw that.
Yeah, summer of 96. I can even remember my nana took me to it. It was an awesome movie. I mean, I was a Looney Tunes fan already, and that was right around the time when I was starting to pay attention to professional sports, and with Jordan being such a big name, that kind of helped me get into basketball. And then I remember on my following birthday in January of 97, so about 6 months after that movie came out, I got a I got a Toronto Raptors hat for my birthday from my dad, and I got a Vancouver Grizzlies pennant that I had on my wall. So basketball definitely had a bit of an impact on me at that time. And that was also the following year I started playing minor basketball as well. So it probably got me into it, that movie.
Do you think, and I hadn't really thought about this too much until you just started mentioning this now, do you think that that movie, especially for people of your generation who might not have previously paid much attention to basketball, how
Mhm.
important do you think this movie was now that we look back in time of pushing basketball further into the mainstream?
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, they had this iconic once in a lifetime player to sell your product, and then they combine it with a kids franchise like the Looney Tunes, and also I think the soundtrack to that movie is amazing.
Oh,
So
hit 'em
they
high.
yeah, so they really just had this perfect storm of events, and it was the right player at the right time, in the right era. And uh, I don't know, I would guess that my age was the target audience, but it seemed like a lot of teenagers at the time were really into it too.
Yeah, I mean, I was just starting high school, I think, and we went. My parents drove me and my buddy that night.
To go see it.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
night it came out. Yeah.
No, that's cool. I just I thought that that was something that they should include in the documentary, and I was glad when I saw it. But just to wrap up on episode 8, that Bulls team, 72-10, their record was broke by the Golden State Warriors a few years ago. But is that still the best NBA team ever?
Well, I'll say in my lifetime anyway. I'm always hesitant to do the best ever thing because I can't really speak to the teams of the 50s or 60s, 70s, et cetera, et cetera. But certainly
Yeah.
in my lifetime watching it, and I say that I can say they're definitively better than the Warriors, or I definitively rank them ahead of the Warriors because they might have set the record for regular season wins, but they didn't win the championship.
And that's the crazy thing too, that they didn't finish, and that just adds to LeBron's legacy, which is in another 30. They're all connected. There's the other, I think it's Believe, is it Believe Land? The
Yes.
documentary, yeah, where they kind of they had to redo the ending because the movie had already the documentary had already come out. And I think they went back and did an alternate version because it was filmed before Jordan had won, or sorry, not Jordan, before LeBron had led Cleveland back to the championship.
They were so certain that poor Cleveland was going to
Yeah,
lose again that they went ahead and scripted the
isn't
ending
isn't
before it
that
happened.
that's seems like the most Cleveland thing. They'll make a documentary in 2015, and then in 2016 their curse finally ends, but the movie's already come out. Like, that's just I watched that. I've only seen it one time, but when they really document everything that happened between when the Cleveland Browns won their last championship, I want to say in 63, I could be off on that, between that time and 2016, it was like 50 plus years of just heartbreak for all their teams basically.
Oh yeah, I mean it's continued to this day since. I mean they had the one win that year, but then since then they've lost LeBron again. The Browns continued to have their horrible years. In baseball, they had I think it was a 3-1 lead in the World Series against the Cubs, and they blew it. And when you blow a lead to the Cubs, who are just as equally cursed, things are really bad.
Well, they made it to the 1997
World Series, yeah,
World Series. They lost to the Marlins, I think. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. They lost. I want to say in extra innings of Game 7 too. I think.
yeah, but I think they were also. I think the Braves knocked them out one of those years too.
Oh, that's right, 1995. I think. Yeah,
Didn't they make it to two World Series?
you're
And
right. And then
they lost both of them.
yeah, 95, 97, and then
Yeah.
they lost again in 16.
Right. So
Yeah.
so a couple close calls there, but anyway, so yeah, lots to discuss if we want to go down the Cleveland route, but we'll stay on the Bulls here. And actually, Cleveland was one of the teams that Jordan beat early in his career too.
Oh, you could make a movie about that alone on the number of times. I think it's 5 times he eliminated them. And put it this way, they were the Dallas Stars to the
Oh,
Cavs
geez.
Edmonton Oilers, except the Oilers at least got one over on the Stars once.
Yeah,
They never got one over on the Bulls, not even before.
and that was we didn't even talk about that, but Jordan, he knew what sports writers picked the Cavs to win that first series, I think in '89. And before the game, he was trash talking the reporters in the front row, just telling them like courtside, I proved you wrong, I proved you wrong, and tonight I'm going to prove you wrong. It's just like he would take the the smallest slight and use it for ultra motivation to just crush you, wouldn't he?
He would make up slights and use them for
Yeah,
motivation.
as we saw, like that thing about there was a guy who apparently said "nice game" to him after that young
Yeah,
player. I'm trying to remember.
Bradford Smith.
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
they said that never happened. Or there was the guy who at the restaurant, the guy who was from North Carolina, and Jordan wanted to shake his hand, and he ignored him or something because they were playing him in the playoffs, and Jordan just had no time for that. That was in the Utah series, I think.
Yes, I think you're correct.
I'm
Yeah.
trying to.
Yeah.
I think it was one of the coaches who he knew from North Carolina, who is now with Utah. I could be off on that, but he would just take the smallest thing, and it would be like, okay, you disrespected me. That's it. Now tomorrow night, I'm gonna end you guys, and he would just go out there and have the game of his life. It seemed like.
I'd love to get into the psychology of someone like honestly would of some psychology of someone that who uses fake things that they know are fake to motivate themselves. Like I can't even process how that works because if you know yourself that you're making this thing up,
Yeah.
how does that how does that I can't but you know what? I mean that was just there's never been anyone that's been as
Well,
ruthlessly competitive as him.
how about when Sports Illustrated put him on the cover of their magazine in '94 and said, "Is Jordan embarrassing baseball?" And he never talked to Sports Illustrated again for the rest of his life.
Exactly, exactly. He like I say, he held grudges. I mean, and go back to his Hall of Fame speech. Here he is, years later, still, can't let go of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's
I
I.
mean, you could look at Kobe, you could look at LeBron, also very competitive guys, but it seemed like they lived, or well, still living too, and for LeBron, a happier life away from the court than Jordan did.
Oh, I mean, Kobe. It came out in the so many pursuits he had off the court in his later years. You could tell that he had found the life outside of basketball. Michael
Definitely.
Jordan is still basically defined entirely by basketball. Um, and I think what really struck me that I noticed in this movie, his family makes like maybe 5 minutes worth of appearances over 10 hours of footage.
Yeah.
Like it's just
You don't
everything
even
was basketball to this guy. There's
you
like
barely
nothing
see his
existed
kids,
outside of
you
it.
know? It's just yeah, I honestly want, and like I never want to speculate on if he was a good father or not, but I have a feeling like the Michael Jordan's world revolved around Michael Jordan.
And Michael Jordan's world revolved around Michael Jordan, and Michael Jordan's existence revolved around winning. That
Yeah,
it consumed him. It was everything. And it's it's not something. That's why I admire guys like Wayne Gretzky. You would say Wayne Gretzky's not. He doesn't. He won't slit your throat to beat you, right? He won't. He won't throw that last pile of dirt on your grave if it means winning. He's a good guy.
yeah.
Um, and
I
you know
will.
what? He's also got a much greater life outside of the game and is much more fulfilled. And to me, that I have that's to me that means more.
For sure. And I will say though, there was the odd time where Gretzky would have that killer instinct. And I saw this thing Sportsnet put out on YouTube a while ago. It was the anniversary of the Kings beating the Leafs in the '93 conference final to go to the Stanley Cup. And Gretzky told this story about how he was at the hotel getting ready to go to the arena that night to play Game 7 in Toronto. And this he's talking to the security guard in the elevator as they go down, and the the security guard or Gretzky's like, how are you doing today? And he said, oh, my day's going pretty well so far, but tonight's going to be crazy. I mean, the fans are going to be going nuts. I'm just, worried I'm going to have a really long night. And Gretzky says like that, just listen to this guy talk. He's like, he thinks the Leafs are going to win tonight. Like he's pretty sure the Leafs are going to win. And just as Gretzky got out of the elevator, he said to him, uh, you know that job that you're worried about at 10:30 tonight? And the security guard said, yeah. And he said, well, don't worry about it at all, because my job starts at 7:30 tonight.
That's fantastic. I've never heard this. Where was
I'll,
this?
I'll send you a link. Sportsnet did just a little package on the Kings and the Leafs, and I just thought that was. And Gretzky even says I'll send you the clip. He says, I never say things like this, but just as he got off the elevator, he said that to me. He said that job you're worried about at 10:30 tonight, don't worry about it at all, because my job starts at 7:30. And that was just like the the ultimate line of you guys are done tonight. And wouldn't you know it, Gretzky scored a hat trick in one of his best games in the NHL, according to him. And yeah, that was quite gave me quite quite a chuckle when I was watching that, because I mean, aside from being a big Gretzky fan, I'm not a supporter of the Leafs at all. So to see to see him have that kind of supreme confidence going into that game was awesome.
That is absolutely, when you call your shot like that and you actually deliver, it's like Messier guaranteeing the win against the Devils, right?
Right.
Everyone guarantees since then there's been like a guarantee in sport every other week that people haven't delivered on, but Messier actually delivered on it.
Right. And this Gretzky situation, he didn't go to the papers or the media or anything. It was just kind of a offhand comment to someone who was working at the hotel where he was staying with the team. But I just thought that was really hilarious. That and I'll show you the clip. It should be on YouTube if you look up Kings and Leafs. But yeah, I have a friend of mine I sent that to as well, and he thought it was pretty funny. So anyway, we won't go too far off track here. Let's go to episode 9 now. This is where the Bulls start to face some tough competition in the 1997 NBA Finals against the Utah Jazz and the 1998 Eastern Conference Finals against the Indiana Pacers. Going into those series, did you think either team had a chance to knock off the Bulls?
I did think the '98 Jazz. I actually did think they were going to win. They probably should have won. Um, they're just for my, Jordan was just unbeatable. There just was no. I mean, at the end of the day, he just was not going to lose, and whether that meant it's just you. I can't even articulate it, because it's this intrinsic quality that he had that you just could not beat him when he came down to it. I mean, that Jazz team was the best team that they'd ever put together. They were well rested. The Bulls were coming off a 7-game series. The Bulls were in their third straight finals. They had been playing basketball pretty much nonstop for the previous 3 years. They were banged up. The Jazz had home advantage. That was everything there for the Jazz to take. They even took game one. They were up 1-0. They got themselves in the driver's seat in that series, and it just shows you that Jordan couldn't be beaten. As far as the Pacers go, going into that series, I didn't think they could win. But when they were tied with the Bulls with about 6 minutes left in Game 7, I actually started to dare to believe at that point in time that they could win, and of course they didn't. I should have
Yeah.
known better. By this time, I pretty much figured out that Jordan's not going to lose. I knew better by then, but there might have been an instant there in Game 7 against the Pacers where I might have allowed myself just for a second to think, could this be it? And it wasn't.
It was a couple close calls. They just as good as those teams were with Stockton and Malone, they just couldn't get over the top. But um, obviously, that's maybe one of the closest times they came. And then there was the whole thing about him getting food poisoning during the NBA Finals and how he still came out and performed so well. It was really interesting that those last two episodes when they really started to show this is really is the last dance, like as the title says, we're getting down to it. This is the last hurrah for this team, and they ended up, as you mentioned, pulling out a huge victory. And as you said off the top of this discussion, Jordan hitting maybe one of the most famous, if not the most famous shot in NBA history.
Yeah, no, I think it will forever be the most famous shot in NBA history. If something tops that, I can't imagine what it would be. Um, yeah, as far as the whole the whole pizza thing goes, I still don't know if I believe that. I think that could be along the lines of another he said good game to me kind of motivate kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like, oh, even the pizza guys are out to get me here in Salt Lake City. I'm gonna show them. But yeah, I mean, it just goes to show like the guy was the ultimate competitor and the ultimate winner.
Definitely, and that kind of leads me into my last question for you on the Last Dance, and it's about what you learned from Jordan in this documentary, or learned about Jordan, I should say, because I knew he was an extremely competitive basketball player, and I sort of assumed that he carried that onto his the rest of his life, but I didn't know to the extent. And you see throughout this documentary that whether it's the NBA finals or on the golf course with friends or playing cards with Magic Johnson or even tossing quarters against a wall with security guards at the United Center. He had to be the best. He had to win. Didn't matter what it was. He had an obsession with winning. He had this drive to achieve greatness, and it it, it fueled him. And he didn't care if his teammates hated him. He didn't care if anyone disliked him. It's just he was going to do what he needed to do to win. And that was probably what I learned the most about him, because a lot of his teammates don't speak that glowingly about him today. I mean, you listen to Horace Grant, John Paxton. I mean, they all seem to like respect his ability in these guys, but they just no one's like, man, I love the guy. Like we had a great time. We won together. And when you hear about those '80s Oilers teams, you hear about the bond they had and how much that Wayne and Mark and Paul, how they all loved each other. Jari, it was just such a tight knit group, and I'm not sure that that was the same with the Bulls. And even though they won 6 titles in 8 years, it was more like it seemed like a lot of these guys hated coming to practice every day, knowing they had to deal with Michael Jordan. So aside from that long-winded lead up to my question, I'll just say, what did you learn about Jordan throughout this doc?
No, I love that you brought up the boys on the bus again, or the Oilers, and that was demonstrated. That camaraderie was very clearly demonstrated in Boys on the Bus. As for what I learned about him, I don't know if I learned anything so much new about him. It only confirmed that everything you kind of heard over the years about how he was
Mm-hmm.
only confirmed, and some of the stuff was almost to like urban legend degree of like how ruthlessly competitive he was, how driven he was, his relationships with his teammates. A lot of it was just so crazy that you couldn't believe it, and this showed that a lot of it was just true. And but it made me there was the one moment, I want to say it's around part 5 or 6 when he breaks down for a minute at the
Yeah.
end, when he's saying that discussing all the pressure that was on him, and that's like that's the second time that I've seen Michael Jordan really show like
He
a human
almost shed a
quality.
tear. Yeah, he came as close to crying as you're ever going to see from him, and he basically said like, "This is how I play, and if you don't want to play like that, then don't play." And you could just see him, and then I think he just says, "Break." Like I need a break from shooting, and yeah, it was really compelling, a lot of these parts. But you hear Magic Johnson talk to him about playing cards, and he's like, he didn't just want to beat me, he wanted to step on my throat. And he's playing in the back of the plane later in the documentary for big money, and there's some other guys on the Bulls who are playing poker at the front or blackjack for a dollar a hand. And Jordan, after being in these $1,000 pot poker games at the back, wants to come up and play blackjack with them. And I think I'm trying to remember who what it was. I think it was their center. Was it Bill? Was
Is
it Bill
Bill
Cartwright?
Wennington,
Bill Wennington?
Wennington, the Canadian?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And he says, "Now, why do you want to play with us?"
yeah,
And Jordan says, "Because I want your money in my pocket." Like, it's
yeah.
just everything had to be, I'm better than you. I beat you. It's like he had to beat those guys. And I mean, look, when I'm on the golf course with my buddies, like I have a friend who's really good at golf, and I maybe beat him 1 out of 5 times. So I'm used to I'm used to losing on the course to him. But as competitive as we all are when we play sports, I don't go out there on the golf course and I'm just like so driven to just beat him. You know, I'm trying to shoot the best score I can, but I'm just not like, oh, screw that guy. You know, I have to get the best of him today. You know.
Yeah, and that's what I mean in the difference between him and Gretzky. And that Gretzky is just as driven and motivated to win, but you to be, and
He's
why I
way
say
more
Michael Jordan
chill.
is the greatest competitor of all time is that he would go into these dark places that are, let's be honest, this is not a healthy place for you to be as a human being.
No.
If you're, that's just not, and that's why no one enters people just can't. He took himself to levels that no one else there would. And I think that scene was pretty profound because it demonstrated the emotional toll it took on him, because not only is he that competitive, he's that driven, but in the process, he did not allow really anyone to get close to him. So
No.
as you can imagine, as he's going through all this pressure and
Well,
all this stress, he has no one to lean on.
look at Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr lost a father at a young age. Jordan lost a father not at as young of an age, but still before his time. Uh, they could have bonded over that, and Steve Kerr said that they never even talked about it. Like, he never even once talked to Michael about it. Like, that would have been such an opening for the two of you to just have this camaraderie and build some just friendship between the two, and it just never materialized at all.
And I mean, that just says it all right there. Like and as again, I mean, it manifested itself in so many ways. And as I was saying earlier, and I don't know the guy, obviously, I'm not making judgments, but the fact that his family had all of about 2 minutes in that whole thing, I think that to me
Yeah.
that spoke volumes. This guy he went to places that human beings should not go if you want to live a healthy and fulfilled life,
No.
and that's part of why he has 6 rings.
For sure. And look at when they were in France playing that tournament before the 97-98 season.
Yes,
One of his
yes.
teammates is like bragging that they won the tournament, and Jordan just kind of wouldn't even look him in the eye, said, "You haven't won anything yet. Like, you haven't won a title." And I think it was the same guy later in the season asked if he could get some tickets from Michael because he had family that he wanted to get to come to a game, and it was so hard to get tickets in Chicago that season. And then he's like, "I don't care if it's front row, or I mean, I don't care if it's courtside. I don't care if it's in the upper bowl or next to God. I just want tickets." And then Jordan said, "What'd you say?" I said, "Oh, it could be tickets next to God. I don't care." And Jordan's like, "You just got some from him." And just like you would never hear Wayne Gretzky even jokingly refer to himself as God. So that Jordan, he definitely had an enormous ego, maybe the likes of which we'll never see again, like the ultimate alpha male. Just had to be the man at all times. And I don't know, did you get a kick out of that? Did you laugh when you said that?
I think I half laughed and half cried.
It's just that's just kind of puts Jordan in such a window where you kind of see exactly like what he's like. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I have a Michael Jordan jersey in my closet. I'm a fan of him as a player, but yeah, he off the court he was maybe not a guy that you'd want to hang out with all the time
Or ever.
or ever. But the last thing I'll just say is I loved that scene when he was throwing quarters with the security guards, and they're playing this game where you try to get the quarter as close as you can to the wall from about 10 feet away without touching the wall. And there's this little security guard who beats him, and he does that Jordan kind of shrug, where he lifts his arms up at look where Jordan used to look at the crowd after hitting a big shot. It's almost like, I guess I hit that. And when the security guard did that on the dock, that made me laugh a lot.
That has got to be one of the great mic drops of all time.
And then Jordan's like, "Oh, your quarters roll. You're getting an advantage there. Like mine doesn't roll." And just he walked out of that room pissed off. And
Yeah,
this is before a playoff game in
yeah,
'96, I think. And it's
yeah.
just like you would think that would be so insignificant. It means nothing. You're about to play an important playoff game, but he was rattled that he didn't win that. So, but yeah, I'm glad that we were able to break down this documentary. Probably one of the best ESPN docs I've ever seen. How about you?
Yeah, it's so hard to compare it to anything else because it has the luxury of going, and also has, I mean, the luxury of having 10 hours to fill, but also the challenge of it. I mean, it's such a once in a lifetime thing. Nothing else like it has ever even been attempted. It truly was remarkable. Yeah, I can't even compare it to anything else. For the most part, the ESPN documentaries are good, and there's like I was recommending the Dream Team one. There's also one called The Bad Boys that's on the Detroit Pistons
I've seen that.
teams. Yeah, they provide. There's a few that I would actually really recommend people watch because they can provide great subtext to a lot of what you saw within this one. But yeah, an absolutely remarkable project. And yeah, we'll see if somebody ever tries to replicate something like that.
Definitely. I mean, to go 10 parts, that's a lot to undertake, but it was fascinating. And this is actually a good time to kind of transition into your podcast. You've started a new podcast, and it focuses heavily on 90s basketball. So I'm just kind of curious, is this something that you've had in the works for a while? And how did you ultimately decide to focus specifically on that decade of the NBA?
Um, yeah, it's a great question. It's an idea that really kind of came to me after The Last Dance, and I saw how much fascination there was around that era of basketball from people who weren't familiar about it before. That I thought, you know what, people might actually be kind of interested in this kind of stuff. It might not just be me as a '90s kid who grew up just immersed in this stuff, and really the culture as a whole. Because we discussed how basketball really branched into the mainstream and pop culture, whether it be into shoes, into music, into video games. It was really it could be your entire life, and to me it was. And so I wanted to really explore that and revisit it. It meant so much to me personally, but I didn't ever think that it might to everybody else until I saw the great interest that was generated around a lot of these documentaries that are being made about that era. So I thought, you know what, no one else is doing this. It's something that even if nobody tuned in, I would have an absolute blast doing. Getting the chance to explore some of this stuff and talk to people from that era. And the third episode is coming out this week, and it's been an absolute blast so far. I'm getting to talk to guys that I watched as a kid. I'm having a lot of fun with it. People seem to be enjoying it so far. So yeah, I'm really glad that I've undertaken it.
Well, that's awesome. And I've listened to part of the first episode. I still have to finish the rest. That'll be good to listen to either at the gym or on my run tomorrow. So I'm happy that you've put this together, and it sounds like it's something you're really passionate about. I know you're a very knowledgeable basketball guy, and look, we're both big 90s pop culture fans in general. So I think it's awesome that you've decided to do a podcast specifically on that era, and I'm sure that The Last Dance could come up at some point.
Oh, it already has. I think it's the bigger question might be: is there a single episode when it doesn't come out? It doesn't come
Yeah,
up because
exactly. I mean,
which
you
is
have
just
to talk about Jordan when you talk about 90s basketball, right?
yeah. I mean, it touched on so many the impact. It's amazing how it comes up in so many different places. It's just that is what it is. But yeah, if there's two things people know about me, it's that they know that I love basketball and I love the '90s. So yeah, there's a it's a natural fit, I guess.
Well, good. That's awesome, man. And I'm looking forward to listen to more and more episodes as they come out. Did you say you have a guest on for the next episode?
Yeah, I've actually just taped it just today, actually, and it'll be out this week. Jerome Pooh Richardson. His nickname is Pooh, actually. That's he actually went by that as his name. So he's got one of the great nicknames of all time in sports, and he's got some pretty cool stories he shared with me. And I do believe that at some point in time, yes, The Last Dance did come up once in the conversation. So he never played with Jordan. He was never on a team that got eliminated by Jordan, but somehow it still found its way into the conversation.
Must have played against him in the regular season or
He
something
did.
though.
Yeah, actually, you know how it came up? He was one of the guys that was doing motion capture for Space Jam. So he was on set.
Oh, no way.
He didn't actually play a role in a movie. He was not like Charles Barkley or any of the other guys that had an on-screen character, but they used him for motion
So
capture.
so he was one of the guys in those green screen suits that was defending
That
him.
exactly. He was one of those
No
guys. Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Well, I hope
Yeah.
you talked about that at least a little bit on the podcast because I have to hear that.
Yes, we get into his.
Okay.
He actually has consulted. He's worked with Adam Sandler on helping him refine his basketball skills for the scenes in Grown Ups, and he worked with Will Ferrell for Semi Pro.
That's cool.
So he answers. I won't give it away. You got to tune in to find out. But I asked him who wins a game of one-on-one between Adam Sandler and Will Ferrell.
Two hilarious guys. And if I remember, Sandler was hitting a bunch of bank shots in Grown Ups. So I'm interested to see what he helped him with. But that's awesome, man. So thank you so much for coming back on the podcast today. I've done 17 episodes. You've been on 3 of them. You've obviously been a important part of the show and one of my favorite guests. So thanks again. And I'll just say, where can people follow you and find your podcast?
Follow me at Brian Swane on Twitter, and there'll be links to the podcast up there. You can also access it on SoundCloud's Apple Podcasts and the tsn1260.ca website.
So everyone, please check that out. And Brian, I'm sure that we'll do this again soon. We've got sports around the corner, and hopefully I'll have you back maybe after the Oilers win the Stanley Cup in early October. What do you think?
Hey, that sounds like a great plan to me.
Well, if that can please happen, then
I'm gonna, you know what? If they win, I'm holding you to that.
oh, you'll be the first one I talk to. We'll record one about 3 hours after the show because I'll be or after Game 7 when they win because I'll be celebrating for a while and then we'll record a podcast at 1 a.m. or something. So
I'm sure there'll be a one-man riot in Saskatoon, right?
oh yeah, well you know what? There's actually quite a few Oilers fans here, so. I think that there would be more than me, but I might be leading the charge for sure.
I don't. We'll see you. What's the main drag in Saskatoon again?
Circle Drive?
Circle Drive. Yes, we'll see you. You'll be leading the charge down Circle Drive. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So anyway, thanks again so much, man, and all the best with the podcast. Good luck with it.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. It's been a great privilege.
For sure. So for Brian Swane, I'm Eric Friesen. This has been the 99 Forever podcast. We're out.